right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're having a wonderful day. It is November 5th, 2025, and we're finally up by just a little bit. So, got a couple of things. We actually got some data. The jobs data came in a little bit better on the ADP. You're going to get ISM services here in a little bit. But other than that, there's people talking about the elections and all that, even though we could get pretty hyped on it. Didn't really have a market effect. It did right away. You are hearing people saying, let's end the shutdown and all of that, and it's leading to some of that. But I would argue the biggest theme right now is the market momentum. Everybody worry about a bubble and all that, but I think you guys have seen it. Earnings, you have killed it on earnings. It's literally been like a 80-90% beat rate. You're like almost 50% above the expected growth rate. And most of these earnings have done pretty terrible in terms of price action. So we're going to see how it all plays out. I think we got Trump here around like 9 or 9:30. I think, oh wait, it's already probably started. But he did talk a little this morning, kind of eased it up. But we're going to see how it plays in the quarterly refunding. If you're wondering why the bonds moved, it came in, nothing, it was all expected, but I think people are using that as event risk to kind of make the move, and then we'll see where it all leads us. But it's gonna be a good day, Chad. I hope you all know that. I was just yelling a lot of it. It's very exciting, but you know what's even more exciting? While it still remains, but I think we live in the greatest country in the world, and I think we have a lot of freedom. That's why I could be so annoying at times, and I hope you could be annoying at times too, man. And I hope you be yourself above all else, and think critically, think accurately, and think for yourself, above all else, man. It's a beautiful thing. But that being said, man, the whole epitome of it is freedom, and it's the people who have given so much for this freedom. That is why I feel like it would be a disservice not to honor the veterans every single morning. So if you have served this country, man, active service, past service, veterans, it does not matter, even your families. I do want to give you guys a special shout out, and I hope you know how important your role is and how important it has been already. And I really hope those of you who haven't served, man, I don't like politicians. I really don't. They don't ever do anything. But I do like I like the people who serve, and I like the people. It don't matter what side they were on. Didn't matter what they agreed with or not. That's the true actual definition of putting your other people before you. So if anything, man, veterans, active service, we love all of you and thank you. And I'm telling you all this because I hope you know that it's your time to own the land. It's your time to own the stocks. I hope that we can help you out and be wise with it. But all of your training, everything you have went through, that discipline, it will transfer over to markets and financials very, very well. So I hope you could be encouraged with that. I hope we could help you make some good decisions, say 10%, get in long term. And I hope you know we love you, baby, and God bless. And I really do encourage you all. Make some noise for the veterans. Let's get them to $6 billion. Hey, yo, Mem Donnie, can we get $6 billion for the vet? I don't know if they feel me, but I love you all, man, and God bless you. And big shout out to everybody else out there giving back to their local communities. Doctors, nurses, teachers, firefighters, police officers, the janitors, the coaches, the garbage men, everybody making their community run, baby. God bless you and thank you. But ladies and gentlemen, please rise up. Place your right hand over your heart. Say it with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, baby. Judge! Oh, wait. Oh, I think it's tied to my chair. Harder! Oh, dude, I had the horn. It was on my chair, bro. Oh, yeah, game time. Oh, Merry Christmas, dude. Yeah, bro, I end my year in October. It's Merry Christmas, mother effer. It's Merry Christmas. You better get ready, bro. It's the end of the year already, even though you still got a couple more months. And then right as it ends, you start the other one, and then mother effer is going to start front running for the next quarter already. What you mean is quarter one and quarter four? How come quarter four lead to quarter one? Well, you want quarter two? What do you mean there's a different fiscal calendar? It's crazy. So yeah, we're going to have some fun today, baby. We had a lot there. Yeah, that's it, bro. It was you didn't know that I shake my chair for the Jets? Yeah, bro. It's like I think the Jets fly over and my chair shakes naturally, but this time, yeah, it was attached to that. Woo! So God bless you, baby. Other than that, we got 2 minutes. I'm going to be watching AMD, the Qs, depending on how the market plays out, we talked about it. I think there's going to be a pump fake. I think all of this has kind of been a pump fake. I do still think I think there's two scenarios where you melt up or you melt down, but even on a meltdown one, I think you might get a little reaction of something else. AKA, I think Trump is going to finally come out with something if we go low enough. Other than that, you kind of need some juice and momentum, but everybody just front ran it because I'm telling you, the earnings were very, very good, but they just didn't perform that way. So we will see what happens. Hopefully you vote for any companies that are asking you to vote and vote accordingly, unless, I don't know, unless Donald Trump is supporting reverse split. Donald Trump, he said he doesn't want a reverse split. I want a reverse split. So yeah, we'll see. And then, yeah, good earnings. AMD, ANET, I like both of those as well. But they did bad. And then watch McDonald's off the morning. That was another good earnings, but just once again, small reaction. So let's have a good time. I hope all of you are paying attention. Make sure you have your own platform up. You might be at a delay. I don't know how long it'll be for some of you, but you should still be good. You could ask anybody here. All of you should have had a great opportunity on Papa John's yesterday. We made 1,000% on the downside, and then I told every single person how to identify the other ones. So delay or not, you're going to get your opportunities, but you do have to lock in on your own, and I am expecting you to be paying attention. Use me as the supplement. It's going to help you out. If you only rely on it without thinking, you're probably going to get front ran by a ton of people. So other than that, my friends, let's have a good day. It's going to be a good day. Let's have one. What do you mean? Oh, yeah. And Tesla, I think he's going to get the vote. I know NVO, they did bad. I mean, they did good, but then Ozempic was bad. And then they're going through that shakeup, 100%, man. If that gets there, yeah, Kimberly Clark's been a new one. We were even talking about Procter & Gamble last night. For all my long-term guys, I would keep those in mind. I think those are really good ones. We have our deposit. On the small account, I think I'm a little below. I still think I'm on margin. I spent too much last time. But then on the big account, I have some cash available, but not anything too crazy. So we'll see what happens. But other than that, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Round 1. Fight. Yeah, Caterpillar with a huge price target raise. That's crazy. Well, yeah, pump fake. I'd be thinking a little broader, not just today, but I'm sure we might get a pump fake even in today, too. Again, we already had a couple of Trump comments, so I don't know if he's live right now. He might be. Other than that, you're opening up very small comparatively. It looks like Russell at 0.3, NASDAQ barely green, SPY and Dow barely red. Supreme, and then the IEPA case, I forgot. That's going to be at 10:30. That's when it begins. It's just opening arguments, but remember that has 60% of tariffs at hand. Papa John's, yeah. And then watch the Canadian stuff, the Canadian minerals. That was the one that crept in there yesterday. The delay is crazy. I heard if you guys complain about it, it gets faster or something, right? And I heard, honestly, I don't want to make fun of you guys too much because I've just noticed the people that complain about it don't get anything out of it. But then yesterday was like probably the 50th example of how you're still actually ahead. So at that point, man, I don't know what to tell you. You gotta make a move, baby. I have been watching Procter. That's a good fucking long term, baby. Now we're fucking talking. But yeah, I really do like the Procter & Gamble. That's what I was saying for the long term guys. That is definitely that's definitely one to be keeping an eye out for. It's came back to those 2023 levels. Remember, you had the Papa John's one. Yum had an offer, and I think there was something else. Yeah, Investor Day on Bank of America, they already came out with a couple of things, and then it starts, I think, at 10 or like 10:30. There's going to be another speech on there. But so far, some of the financial guides, it was kind of lukewarm. Considering it's their first Investor Day in 15 years, it was not that hot. See. Yeah, and then you have ISM services. People are going to be scrutinizing the employment side. Other than that, we'll see. Bitcoin moving a little bit. Oh, Iren and Nibis. So let's see, man, if this actually holds up. Otherwise, you kind of saw yesterday played out. If we start to get that lag or not, you know, that, yeah, we're going to find out. Iren. Yeah, my thing's already lagging. And then AMD. Watch the other two. So AMD, ANET, and Mickey D's. Oh, that one just started to move. That's that. Habibi, why so much? Dude, it's terrible, dude. So anything like 1.5, 2 stay. I'm already seeing bad spreads, but we'll see if that persists. And then I think you got a little crash course on your boy, what's it called? Eli Lilly. Because if it does move enough, you will get it. Yeah, AMD is doing decent. Honestly, AMD was washed yesterday, so that's actually a pretty good one. There's Eli Lilly now. Oh, no way, bro. Yeah, prayers up for Open Face's dad. He's in the emergency surgery. Dude, that's crazy. Well, one of my boys just had a colon issue. So, yeah, those are scary, man. But prayers up, bro. And be with him, too. I don't think you're going to have anything crazy today. You know, and if there is, I'll text you. You'll be fine. But that's crazy, man. Yeah, dude, yesterday, man, we had a little talk on some of this. Because I have noticed the pickup in some of these things. All right. Those are not good. Goose, hymns. All right, Tesla was doing a lot better there. Let me check all of them. There was that's gold, but then even AIG and a couple of insurance ones who had earnings, and Humana had earnings. They were actually good, but they went down in just the space. Barrick on the high. Remember, this thing doesn't move. We had one of those 2,000 percenters on there. Kind of tweaking. SPY coming down. They're holding the thing on tariffs. Yeah, no, he's not there yet. Yeah, I don't know if gold, I mean, they finally got a good day here. And then Eli Lilly's just ripping, bro. Ooh! Yeah, bro. If you did take the front run on that was fucking hit now. That's beautiful. GG's. Yeah, you're getting decent bids on them. Yeah, and people are fucking buying the shittiest ones out there. Well, beautiful, man. Keep riding that one or make free. Oh my goodness. TSM, hymns again. I keep seeing hymns. And they had matched. They had earnings last night. I like some of the post-earnings ones. I like the McDonald's and AMD, but it's just the spreads. But then again, that's literally the risk. Consumer continued to spend 5% year to date. How do I feel about Chipotle? I like it. We talked about it several times, man. You were complaining about people ruining it in the morning, but you know, it's questions like that. So yeah, I love Chipotle. We talked about it a couple times. We're waiting, and then there's a couple ahead of the lead in there that we would want to buy instead, but I am still a fan. Woo, you hear the bells? It's very, very good. Disney has been quiet. Shrelly took a big position in Biohaven 5 minutes ago. Do they have did they show up on the thing, or did they just drop off of bad results? Someone should ask him about Cure. Ask him if he thinks they're gonna have a shot, because remember, that's the one that they said that the data wasn't good for Huntington's, and then that was it. But they said there's still a shot. Biohaven cuts R&D spend 60% after their rejection of drug for rare neurodegenerative disease. Yeah, so Chads are bringing that, so he's buying that one. We'll see. But that was the headline of why it dropped. He said FDA might change their mind on Cure. That's what I was saying. That last time that happened with like SRPT, there was opportunity. I don't follow that drug or disease as much, let alone all of the bios. But that's what I'm saying. If that did happen, that stock is going to go up 40%. But it could come in a couple of months, I'd assume, not instantly. PayPal on the high. ALGT, gold still, man. But gold's coming down. IRM had earnings, and now they just popped $2. They raised their dividend as well by 10%. McDonald's chilling. They didn't move too much. Netflix as well, actually. Let's see if he goes up. Apple is down $2. I mean, SPY and NASDAQ, only one's red. Dow went green, and Russell has been up since the morning. So we're going to have to see how those work out. Looks like big tech is about 3/4, and then you got Google in the green. I think Meta. Qualcomm today. Yeah, dude, Qualcomm, remember, they had that, what was the announcement that made them go up 20%? Wasn't it them getting into the data center business? Wendy's, yeah. Well, again, we had a talk on Wendy's yesterday, every day, every time we bought pizza. So I'd encourage you to get caught up with the idea or just make your decision if you like it. But I'm not adding Wendy's to my long term. I haven't had a Baconator in a while. So it's a good one. It was, we were just talking sour cream and chive potatoes. KD. Tessie, what is this? Kendrick Holdings. Ryam on the low. Googly Woogly on the high. That's only one of 2 or 3 of the Mag 7s, and then Zillow. Good morning. It was the data center racks for Qualcomm. Yeah. Remember, that was fat, bro. That was a crazy play. So it could be good, but I mean, what's the problem right now? I'm glad they actually came down, but dude, every single fucking earnings has been terrible, but they've been good. This is so odd. You've seen this before. I would love to see. You guys aren't asking me this one, but I'm going to repeat it. You guys will ask me the ones that don't matter over and over again, but this one, because I'm like, dude, you have literally gotten some very good earnings reports. This is even different than last quarter. Last quarter, it was just we knew it was going to kind of be a scam with how they were doing it. But this time, it's like these were solid ass beats by a very big margin, and they're all doing bad. Again, you've already beat the growth rate by 50%, and you're close to 90% of companies beating. But they just ran up so much, expectations, all of that has created this this weird drama. That's that. These spreads are whack. Oh, but your boy's always like that one. SanDisk as well. I don't know if that's going to react with Qualcomm. I'm trying to get you a good bid, bro. Trying to get you a good bid. You know what I'm saying? Alright, market going down a little bit. Futu and Meta. Meta's on the low. Oh, that's the better one. Okay, I got one for you. Well, do you want it or stock? This is not going to be like the Papa John's. This is, again, until we get a good, easy, I think, logical play. I mean, in this environment, you got to be fucking right, man. You know, like you guys saw that Uber yesterday, right? That one worked, but it took you fucking 10 hours or 7 hours just to make that type of move. So I do hope you keep that in mind. second. Mickey D's going. Sandicinta. Oh, who's the other one? ANET. Yeah, McDonald's is going up now. Try our new long Terminator. Woo! Intel on the high too. I feel like we haven't seen that in a minute. And then SPY coming down. I can't wait to see the breakdown of this because you're moving very interesting. There's a couple names holding up, a couple of the earning stuff, but then yeah, you have Mag 7 about 3/4 down, but I don't think the breadth is as bad today. Let's see. It's your boy. Yeah, equal weight still in the green, so not bad. All right, yeah, they're scamming. Yeah, Intel's going. You're gonna hold cash as long as you don't have more than 20%. I don't think that's the worst idea, because there's most of them have been the same exact names. However, like I'm saying, like Procter Gamble. Watching that one come down, even like Kimberly Clark, you get one of those opportunities. I think it makes it very interesting. So that's what I like. Oh, they fucked that bit up, dude. Yeah. All right, there was just a sweet spot on one of these, but they just fucking scammed it. This was the one I was gonna give you, Chad. But yeah, they just jacked up the fucking spread for some reason. That was a perfect one. I don't know if you still want it, but I don't mean here. Microsoft, Figma. What's PRCT? Procep Robotics? Biorobotics? Oh, there's ISM Services. 54.8 versus 55.2. I think we got the ISM, though. So that's S&P. That's not the main one. The main one you're going to get is in 15 minutes from now. Trump talking with Republican senators. Yeah, dude, Bank of America is kind of underwhelming. They are still going to have another part of the event, but they didn't really come out swinging. Yeah, they're already down 3 now. Ugh. I don't see your boy Trump. Here, look at this one. I got Bob Ross marathon. That one showed up. I don't see Trump though. Yeah, the replay from the morning. Yeah, he made some comments. He even talked a little bit about China as well. So that was good. Eli Lilly again. Orbs. AstraZeneca. What is that CCCX? We see that. Watch for any Canada headlines, but you just pop now. Finally. Like I'm saying, the breakdown's very weird. It's more tech, or a couple big names down, but you have better breadth right now. And you just had data. There's going to be another set. And then most data was good. Remember, payrolls this morning, they were not weak, or at least compared to the expectation and the previous. There's Intel, Pfizer. On Levi's, I mean, it's a good brand, but I don't think they have like growth. So I mean, it could offer stability in a portfolio, but I don't know if they even pay a dividend. So I would like better companies though. I mean, I don't think it's the worst, but you know, I think Procter Gamble, that's a new one coming to life. that we should really talk about. I haven't bought it yet, but if it goes lower, I probably will, or even depending on what I had in my portfolio, I think it's really nice. Yeah, Target's even a good one too, but I think Procter & Gamble has more stability than not. But yeah, Levi's and jeans. I don't really have a pair of jeans, believe it or not. I used to, but not anymore. All right, NVIDIA's coming up now too. That's gonna help lift up this SPY. And then SPY 0.1, bro. See, yesterday when you had your rally, you were just rallying back to the 1% gap down. So anything from here, if it actually goes green, and then we'll see what that does to some of the other premiums. But yeah, you're gonna need follow through and then give it another 12 minutes. That data is either gonna add to it or kind of slow this down. And then bonds are murdered today. IREN's climbing back up. I've seen that one a couple of times. And then actually, be careful on those Qualcomms. Because you see how it's moving up now? That might be a little weird. So yeah, just get ready to dip on any of those. I wouldn't, or we need real movement. Let me actually check those Ubers from yesterday. Because like I'm saying, that one took a while. NVIDIA's back to the 200s. Yeah, that Uber's still holding up, but it's not. Even with this climb, though, you're holding break even. Even with time. Caterpillar, they got the upgrade and Investor Day yesterday. Amgen was a post earnings. I don't know if they got rewarded. Yeah, they are 4% and breaking out. So see if that one keeps going. It's biotech, but they had earnings, and I mean, it's not too often you see someone get rewarded for earnings lately. Pizza. They do have earnings. How do I own a farm and no jeans? Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like Mindani. I'm one in name, other in action, I guess. I'm a farmer by title, but I guess I'm just a Nepo baby. I'm a Nepo baby in the Lord's family. Amen. Pinterest too, that was a decent one. I think they beat Ibra by fucking 20% and still dumped. All right, there's AMD. I really liked AMD's earnings too. So like I said, I think we need the market, but hey, we'll find out. Anything without, if we could go back to just ripping without it, that would be great. You want to be a better trader? What do you recommend? People don't like my idea with it because we have literally 1,000 people in the locked in, and these guys are all trading. But I think they're doing so well and able to do it because they did the priority in learning the right way. So my stance on becoming a great trader: 10%, save your money, build a long term, and do that for about 6 to 12 months. Build and establish a good long term with savings, because that you're going to be involved in the market doing that. You'll get to learn some things. You paper trade while you're doing that, and then I think you'll be able to know which way is better, and you'll be able to have results from your long term too, which could either inspire you or detract you to do other things. So yeah, just don't rush it. I mean, that's the simple way to put it, man. And if you really want to build a good foundation, you could do it while making your time useful by building and learning, because you are gonna, a stock is a stock. You learn equities before derivatives are gonna be great. If you could learn how to hold it, you'll know how to flip it. But usually, if you try to learn how to flip it, you don't know how to hold it. And then you gotta be consistent. Very consistent. Like Bradley Frizzle and the Peach, baby. Oh my goodness. God bless you, Peach Nation. So yeah, that's a great, wow, what a conversation. What a cherry on top, you know what I'm saying? What a damn cherry on top. That's what I'm talking about. But yes, just like that. Consistent. Amen. Woo! Right? The ever timely Peach, dude. It's amazing. Buki on the low. Actually, where are the China names? Yeah, China's starting to wake up, and everything's kind of going, man. So first time in a while we've seen all of these lit up green. First time in like 5 days, dude. Calm down. But it's going up here. Equal weight is doing good, but now the SPY just took over because that means you got tech, Nvidia, even damn Bitcoin's going up. Let's see where the dollar's at. Marvel. What's the other one? Iran. Remember, those even had deals recently. Yeah, but people don't like that answer when I give it to them. Because, I mean, usually by the time you're on, like, fucking YouTube learning how to trade, you know, most people have made up their mind. And they're like, I want to go. I need to do this now. I see everybody making money. All these stories on Reddit, which I hope you know they're fake. But, yeah, it's, if you take it slow, you'll be fine. But you do have to make the decision of prioritizing. Everything's kind of ripping right now, man. So, is this the pump fake of today? Or is this the pump fake of this? So, we got a lot of gaps to fill. Remember, yesterday, bro, you spent about an hour and 10 minutes going straight up. And then we ended a little bit lower. So, yeah. That's the responsible answer, not the sexy one. No, I raise you. It's not the responsible answer. It's the right answer. I don't even think it's I just think it's correct. That's it. One God, one way. That's that. I don't know if they feel me, bro. Gotta stay consistent, man. 1 year since the greatest comeback, golden age of America, White House tweet. Oh, yeah, the 7-year badge, bro. I forgot. We do need that. Or I think it's 6 year? 7 year? Yeah, we're on 5, I think, is the furthest. We're going to have to get that ready. The Trump, he hasn't said anything yet, but he did in the morning about China, and he said, we're going to set a record. So we'll see. Peach Penthouse is a go, baby. Oh, it's going to be fun. Again, dude, a lot of probabilities. You know, and again, I still think prediction markets are scammy and gonna hurt people. They're like, yeah, you quiet now. It's like, no, bitch. They were influencing them, not predicting them. But my real probabilities, a lot changed yesterday. So get ready, because a lot of doors got open, but we do have to see some results here in many facets, both politically to market. Because like I'm saying, even you got to see a little bit of it today. You know, the shutdown. We're going to see what happens with the shutdown, because that's going to, now that you got the votes in, we knew that was going to start motivating people to make different decisions. Yeah, more balls added. One couple fell through, and then 2 more, probably about, I think, 6 to 10 more got created yesterday. Some you already knew about, but now, yeah, it's going to get fascinating. Google, Baba, everything. I kept Google up here. It just looks nice running. Amazon, not so much. Yixamish. Who is it? AM Dizzle. McDonald. ANET, that was a good one, but didn't move. 3M, IBM. Let's check Staples. Staples are down. Financials are down. Probably because Bank of America. Yeah, Palantir. There is a couple of names out there. What time is it? Give it 4 more minutes. I'll give you the checkup. Yeah, and then even the damn Robinhood thing. Look back options, baby. Please ask your favorite financial influencer, especially if you see them ever having Robinhood content. You should ask them about this, because you guys saw what happened, right? They started doing the same thing I was telling you guys with Robinhood. People started doing it with the Tesla vote. And they're like, we're going to move our money out of Schwab. And guess what? Schwab caved. Schwab ended up voting for Elon because of that. I'm telling you guys, it's crazy. And then even your boy Vlad responded. And then, then Tyree got banned. I think they reported him. Sorry, Tyree. I know, it's very dirty. But the long story short, because someone was like, $250 million is nothing. And I'm like, Habibi, you're right. Even though that's a lot of money, it's not a lot of money in the grand scope of things, right? But do you know how fractional banking works? So take that $250 million and now times it by 10. And that's your window. Ta-da. Google it. Let's see Broadcom. Actually, Broadcom is really nice today. Usually just stays in that pin there. So yeah, that is starting to move. All right, man. This is a bet. I don't know. How does this compare to yesterday? Oh, it's very similar. Fuck. Yeah, so we'll see what happens, like, kind of near the Euro close. Other than that, though, this is very similar to yesterday, just without the gap down. NVIDIA, DraftKings, it could be good. The earnings, but I don't know what's gonna. I feel like the overhang. We took those puts after the NBA shit, so I don't know how that's gonna all factor into it. But and then I think there was like 1 or 2 updates with Pennsylvania taxes and like some of the other gambling taxes, which could get in the way. But I haven't been following it other than that. And then Meta is starting to get a candle. IBM, AASP, Agassi Sports to collaborate to enhance tennis through AI digital innovation. Nice. C-Web and K-Web, yeah, they're all waking up. That's the first one in a while. That's that. One God, one King. Alrighty. Oh, I think it was Dio. McDonald's very slow though. Some of these other ones. ISM services strong. 52.4. That's why bonds are getting clapped. Let me check the employment. 52.4 versus 50.80. And then ISM service prices 70. Estimate was 68. New orders 56.2 versus 51. That's why gold's moving right now. Let me see the employment. 48.2 versus 47.6. So still low, but better than expected. Bad part was prices. Otherwise, bonds are taking the strong data as of bad. And then Google and some of the tech is still running. I know I really like the Broadcoms. Those look nice. When it moves, it's good. If it stops, it'll suck. Meta's starting to wake up now, too. So that's been like, what, 3-4 days of the washout there? Actually looks nice. Good news is bad news for the cut, yes. So when you're near a cutting cycle, essentially good news is going to be bad news, and bad news will be good. At least for a little bit. I mean, we play that game. I know Donald Trump and Besant do not like that. They've commented on that, but yes. Marvel on the high. Tap up 3. That would, dude, their earnings wasn't that good, but yeah. Oh, I don't know where they closed yesterday. They went up 3 yesterday and came down. Just like yesterday. I mean, again, we'll see here in the next, like, what? Give it about 30 minutes. We'll find out if this is going to hold. Again, ISM, that's why you're getting the big move on bonds, gold, and a couple of other commodities or currency related. But generally in line a little better. I mean, nothing's fell off a cliff, though. No employment has fell off a cliff. Yeah, prices paid. That was a 3-year high. But other than that, I mean, it's not strong, it's not weak. It's like, this is what, I mean, tell me you haven't heard me say this. Nothing's really changed in the last several months. You know, a lot of this year we've noticed things, and some things would make gradual moves, but you're generally all within the same neighborhood that you were in before all of this stuff. City, the banks, StubHub on the high. Dio's going too. That's the one I keep seeing, and then so is Tap. You think your package was on that UPS plane? No way, dude. That whole plane thing was so terrible. It was crazy. Did you see the damn like line of fire that thing created? Bro, it was a fireball. But like, I can't believe it. They had to do a 5-mile radius. Yeah, dollar just popped off of the data. That was interesting because equities didn't really react to it. But then again, you had your gold and all that. Yeah, Tap is climbing NVIDIA with a nice little 200, and we're back above there. Eli Lilly stabilized, but we'll see the next move. Again, you have a couple of events today, and some will be a little later. I don't know how it happened, yeah. That was the random. There's another random one, too. Core Weave kind of declining. I don't know. I'll check if there's news, but $3 drop on Core Weave. Stocks little changed after October ISM. Your friend, dude, some of you sent me videos. So there was a Chad who has a friend who worked there, and he sent me a video very early, and then that video ended up getting picked up by the news. But yeah, there's a lot of you in Kentucky, bro, and a lot of people literally have film of it. It was insane. Air Force approves BAE Systems Compass Call Mission Cruise Simulator. All right, moving up. Unity had earnings. Again, you're a couple minutes off the data. Dollar went up, bonds went down. Prices paid was a little worried, but everything else was economically, nothing has really changed. What is it? I thought is it BAH? No, doesn't BAE have a stock? Tiva CEO well positioned on tariffs. They have 9 manufacturing plants in the U.S. Is that why they're up 16? 2 key branded drugs are made in Israel but have ability to absorb any tariffs. The last day to vote for the love-hate play. You could look it up, brother. I think you just want to talk about it. Come on. They're connected to NOC. Thank you for that. I thought they were publicly traded. But yeah, they kind of moved a little bit off of that. Remember LMT and the Saudi news? They moved off that as well. All right, SPY going up, and more NVIDIA, more everything. Let me get you guys the checkup. You've been here for 36 minutes, or since the market opened. Let's see what we got. Dow Jones, 14 green, 16 in the red. 55 green, 46-ish on the NASDAQ in the red. And then SPY, 300 green, 200 red. Is it better than yesterday? Yesterday was still 50-50 by the time you were ripping like this. But it's only 0.5%, a little bit more than 0.5% on the NASDAQ. Russell's the one that was good from the morning, still doing good. And then, yeah, just hopefully you don't give this up in 30 minutes, and then it'll be fine. Netflix is killing you. Why are you telling us? Because in the long term, you're up 400%. This is a long-term chat, my friends. Long-term chat. Please and thank you. Good morning. Melly on the low. And then Marriott, a couple, watch the travel ones. Don't we have Airbnb? Is Meta? Yeah, Meta's good, but then, dude, the out of monies are moving, but not really today. It's still kind of odd. You nibbled on long term? Why are you telling me? Should I throw a party for doing what we're supposed to do? So I don't know, guys. Final warnings? Final warnings? I mean, or maybe we're about to make a fuck ton of money then. Because I don't know. This is a bumpy start. Bumpy start. After the great cleaning up, we should have way, way more. Or way, way less. Good morning, baby. How are you? God bless America. All right, be okay. Even Intel too. So more tech and then now crypto. It's funny with the maybe this will be the segment where dollar and the other assets go up. Because remember, gold was doing good. They all kind of moved a little bit on the data and equities kept going. Palantir 182. Damn. 20 bucks, 2 days. IRWD FDA, first drug for 7 years and older with IBS and constipation. Oh, wow. It's kind of moving there. I know IBS drugs actually kind of go hard, believe it or not. It's a big addressable market. Yeah, they're doing the little interview thing, like they have the people at the Supreme Court, but...
What we have here is 2 layers. There's the layer, the bedrock of the president's...
Dude, a lot of people are watching this. Why? Yeah, so I don't know, man. A lot of people are watching this. I think Trump is supposed to come on later, but not at the IEPA thing, but these are just the oral arguments for now in the opening case to limit 60% of the tariffs. You know, bro, I thought when they passed Proposition 50 last night, I swear I was going to wake up and then the judge was going to be like, that's unconstitutional. We block it. But then this time they let it through. I said, what? That's crazy. I guess you voted for it. Dude, that was so wild yesterday, man. You guys have no idea. I went to go vote because I was doing it yesterday. So like, I told the guys last night, I was, and that's why, like, I don't know, you guys keep wanting to buy Locked In. They were just that was my therapy session yesterday. I would just vent to them. So they pay me for that. So I don't know, like, it's not for everybody. But I was calling my dad because, you know, people were they were like, no Christians get killed in Africa. It's animals. I said, okay, guys. So I wanted to call my dad because I remember they used to try to kill him every time he would go to these countries and preach the gospel. So I was like, Dad, you remember when you were in Sudan? Did they tried to kill you, right? And I'm talking to my dad on the phone just having him reminisce these stories from like 10, 15 years ago. And then like halfway through it, my dad's like, "Did you vote?" I'm like, "What?" And then I hear these people in the background. He was with his little church friends. Fucking Gary. He's like, "Well, you gotta vote. You gotta go and vote out there." I was like, "What?" And they started pressing me, dog. And I was like, "What the fuck?" So I was like, "All right, fine." And then I was like, "All right, I'll do the video after." And I go to vote, bro. Biggest line ever. And it was, I just knew right when I got there. I said, "Oh, this shit passing." Dog, I started talking to people. I loved them. It was a lot of fun, man. We had good conversations. I shared Netflix movies. And then the conversations got weird when I started asking if they knew about it, about Prop 50. Everything was chill up until I started asking what we were there for. And I was like, oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. So, yeah, bro. It was a nice reality check, though. Because I think people don't still vote. And like the people who want to win, like, or they like care, they're gonna get out there and vote, dude. They don't even know what it was. I can't believe it. If you know, it's not about Democrat versus Republican. It's about this. There's not a crisis. There's not a problem. There's nothing happening. And the people willfully just gave all of the control to the government. I don't get it. Like, actually. So think about it. You weren't locked inside. Nobody was forcing you to do anything. They all that was like it's like the Patriot Act with no patriot, or with no attack. That was like the COVID shit without COVID. That's why I was like, holy shit. And yeah, so it's very odd. A lot of them, everything that happened yesterday, there's a lot of them that just like what it reflects and what it says. Because a lot of people, I even asked them, they just were there to vote against Trump. That's what they thought it was. And although it could be, that's why I think it's Texas's fault for opening up Pandora's box. But yeah, a lot of people just thought it was some Trump shit. And then, yeah, they were willfully, like, they were really willing to like give all of the power, or give more power to the government, and without really understanding the consequences. So, but hey, I did my part. That was fun though. Are they talking global warming?
It's foreign facing.
I have the captions.
We need all of these things to face, to tax fossil fuel or to do something else. That's all Biden would have had to do with any of his programs.
Let me put it this way, if I may.
Is just declare some foreign-facing purpose?
If I may, maybe I can articulate it this way. The power to impose tariffs is a core application
down to listen,
of the power to regulate foreign
you don't really
commerce,
hear from
which is
the
what
judges.
the phrase regulate importation and
so you are going to hear some back. It's like a court case.
Could you tell me why it is
that when Congress
intended to permit a president to regulate by imposing tariffs, it's always used tariff and regulate? I have about 16 laws in the past.
I know, but this time in Cali, there was only one thing on the ballot.
Taxing, that it used taxes simultaneously.
You could have thoroughly researched this one.
But it didn't here.
Respectfully, this court came to the opposite conclusion, if I may, in Algonquin, where the phrase was not imposed duties.
Well, but that was, we did something in Algonquin. It was in the duties section, unlike here. It was paired with questions about decreasing tariffs and increasing tariffs. So it's a very different statute than the one at issue here.
But the governing language, admittedly, the references to duties in Section 232A, 232C does not refer to them, and the court didn't refer to 232A at all, or the phrases duties or tariffs as analysis.
He does sound like Alex Jones.
The phrase adjust.
If he starts trying to sell me vitamins right now, I'm going to lose
it. But it was in the context.
It
was in context of activities that had to do with raising and lowering duties. Here, the verbs that accompany regulate have nothing to do with raising revenues in the form of taxes.
And counsel, Algonquin wasn't a textualist opinion. Do you agree with that? In other words, the analysis that the court was using there was really keyed to the legislative history of that statute, and it wasn't as though we were doing an interpretation of the word adjust.
I disagree with that. I think if you read the opinion, first it talks about plain meaning, then it talks about statutory context, and then it goes on to legislative history, so it was all three of those. And the conclusion it came to, it directly addressed and rejected the argument that the D.C. Circuit had accepted in that case, which is that when Congress wants to delegate the authority to tariff, it uses a consistently explicit and well-defined approach, which is to use these magic words, tariff, tax, impost, and so forth.
All right,
the court said, no, Congress is not bound to use that particular formulation when it wants to confer this power.
Let me ask you about the premise of your argument, which you sort of started at the beginning saying that one would expect for Congress to give the president a broad leeway in this kind of foreign affairs context. And I guess I'm wondering whether you also don't have to contend with the actual purpose of IEPA in making this argument. Because as I understand it, that the IEPA was designed and intended to limit presidential authority, that Congress was concerned about how presidents had been using the authority under the predecessor's statute, TWIA, and it's pretty clear that Congress was trying to constrain the emergency powers of the president in IEPA. So it seems a little inconsistent to say that we have to interpret a statute that was designed to constrain presidential authority, consistent with an understanding that Congress wanted the president to have essentially unlimited authority.
I disagree with that because what Congress actually did as...
What part do you disagree with? I'm sorry.
Well, I disagree with the notion that they were trying to constrain the breadth of the actions the president may take when it comes to this particularly narrow domain, which is various regulations of transactions.
But how can you disagree with that? I mean, the history is what it is.
Because they made a series of changes to IEPA that relate to the triggering conditions, so to speak, and the procedures that apply, but they did not change the language.
Right, but what was the intent of Congress in changing the language? Wasn't it to constrain presidential authority in this area?
To constrain it in the triggering conditions and the procedures that apply in this
those are the triggering context. The triggering conditions and procedures that apply are a means to constrain. That is how they went around about constraining. But my point is that Congress enacted this legislation with the intent of preventing the president from having unlimited powers in this area, and you're asking us to now interpret that statute consistent with an understanding
overnight
that Congress
funding rate. Remember, I told you it hit that 4.2. It just plummeted back to like just above 4, almost 3.9.
Congress took the language from TWIA.
That's good. So think about it. I don't know how this will hold up today, but coming into it, you have a little less liquidity pressure.
And therefore, the natural inference is
Congress did not intend to change the scope of authority. I'll look at the other stuff, but that's good. That's at least one less panic.
Did any president under TWIA use that language to impose tariffs?
Well, yes, President Nixon's 1971 tariff.
Not a tariff. That wasn't a tariff. It was a licensing agreement during wartime. It was a specific thing.
Wartime.
A tariff I'm talking about.
I'm referring to President Nixon's 1971 tariff.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Yes, I thought you meant Lincoln.
Not only that, but then it was upheld by the Court of Appeals with exclusive jurisdiction under this very phrase.
Can I back you up just a second? I'm sorry. You're talking so quickly.
Sorry.
President Nixon did not rely on TWIA initially to impose the tariffs. Is that correct? I understood that was just a litigating position.
I like how she could go from, she like me, bro. She could go so like angry and then
I wouldn't put it that way because he has a broad invocation. You
hear it?
A range of statutes, something
it's
like
like half of it sound bad and then the other half sounds so
and
sweet.
I think the understanding is he didn't want to
I don't know. I'm
confused. By invoking the Trading with the Enemies Act by specifically invoking it, but in litigation it was defended on that ground. So the Department of Justice defended it as an exercise of TWIA and did so successfully.
What's the significance of the Nixon example and precedent here? Because I think figuring that out is real important to deciding this case correctly. So,
well, there's one obvious, very powerful takeaway from it, which is that this very two-word phrase, regulate importation, that we say it carries with it the authority to tariff, impose a regulatory tariff.
All right, you're talking about this is just like yesterday. You're actually 9 minutes ahead of yesterday, where you started dumping off the little rally.
Of the phrase regulate importation had been interpreted 2 years before Congress reenacted that language in IEPA, had been interpreted to carry with it
and then just watch.
authority
Chips
to,
are coming down. Intel's at
authority
least
to
dropping.
impose tariffs. So
This all could be given by Chips. Remember, you have a little bit more
just back on the Nixon.
on
What
the
was
high,
the
but yeah.
scope of the Nixon tariffs?
10%. He imposed a 10% tariff
10%, baby.
across the board to all our major trading partners to address a balance of payments deficit, where he was trying to bring all the major industrial nations to the negotiating table, which he successfully did. But for the imposition
You guys
of the tariffs,
hear
and they negotiated the
insufferable. I hear a
Smithsonian
winning
about 5
candidate.
months after which he lifted the
Bitch,
tariff.
you live
So
in
the
a whole
tariff
nother
there
world
was
right
used
now. Y'all
as here,
tripping.
in part as
That's what I
leverage to
learned in
get
the
our
last
trading partners to the
10 minutes,
negotiating
24
table.
hours.
And it was subsequently upheld by the Federal Circuit, the CCPA, its Federal Circuit's predecessor, that had exclusive jurisdiction over that question.
They elected a guy who kicked the dog
and then
out
2
front of
years
the
later,
police.
Congress took that same phrase and reenacted it in IEPA after
You
carefully
kicked my
studying
dog.
the problem
You don't remember
of
that?
presidential emergency powers and being deeply concerned about, excessive or
They
abusive
said make him a judge.
exercise of that power. So
Make
that
him Attorney General.
That whole sort of process gives sort of strong sort of confirmation that this phrase, regulated importation, carries with it the power to tariff. Now, of course, that's not our leading argument. Our lead argument on interpretation is there's a pedigree, historical pedigree of regulating imports specifically, where the power to tariff is just the sort of a core application of that, a quintessential exercise of that power. That goes back to Gibbons against Ogden and Justice Story's treatise and runs all the way through cases like McGoldrick and Board of Trustees of Illinois.
Sauer, can I just ask you a question? Can you point to any other place in the code or any other time in history where that phrase, together, regulate importation, has been used to confer tariff-imposing authority?
Well, as to regulate importation, that was held in TWIA. So obviously, and that's...
Okay, so an intermediate appellate court held it in TWIA, but you just told Justice Kavanaugh that wasn't your lead argument, that your lead argument was this long history of the phrase regulate importation being understood to include tariff authority. So my question is, has there ever been another instance in which a statute has used that language to confer the power? Well, putting aside Yoshida.
I mean, obviously, the other statutory example is just imports. The cases we rely on are cases where, for example, in Gibbons, it's Ogden and Justice Story's
But that just shows the word can be used that way. None of those cases talked about it as conferring tariff authority. I understood you to be citing McGoldrick and Gibbons in those cases just to show that it's possible to say that regulating commerce includes
and PayPal?
the power to
no
tariff.
news on it, though.
I think our argument goes a bit further than that as an interpretive matter, because if you look at that history, the history of
coming
Would
back
you
up.
just
Meta is
answer
moving
the
up.
Justice's question?
None of this is just headlines. Like I'm
Can you
saying, some of the
identify
overnight
any
funding
statute that
too.
use that phrase to confer
That's a
tariff?
good
the only
sign.
2 statutes I can identify now
Especially if
are
it starts to
TWIA,
get
as
pump
interpreted in
faking.
Yoshida,
SAT
and then
too.
closely related, not
Think about
regulated importation,
AMET.
but adjust imports in section 232.
Well, I think adjust imports is differently. So the answer is the contested application in TWIA, and then
Pump
now
in the
in IEPA.
ISM shit again.
And then, of course, I mean, there's a sort of direct
BB.
line there.
Yeah, I understand that. But
Yeah.
okay.
All right, man. If we
And
could
then-
get
but then
past this and hold
more
for like another
fundamentally,
20
we
minutes,
rely on
that'll be a very
historical
good sign.
sources. So there's this long historical pedigree of broad delegations of the foreign commerce power, not the power to tax that we're not asserting here, delegations of the foreign commerce power to the president, going back to Gibbons against Ogden, all the way through McGoldrick and Board of Trustees, where this court and founding era sources say the power to, in other words, the power to tariff is kind of this natural, as everyone knows, that includes...
Just ask you one other
power to
question
regulate
about
commerce.
the plain text, General Sauer. So you've referred to the other verbs in IEPA as capacious. Would you really describe them as capacious? Because to me, things like nullify and void have definite meanings. I agree with you that regulate
I don't
is
know
a
what the
broader
fuck
term,
capacious
but those
mean.
words I think are powerful.
I don't know what it means.
They pack a punch, but I wouldn't describe
Capacious.
them as capacious
Having
in
a
the
lot
sense
of
that they have a
space
wide range of
inside,
meanings. So can
roomy.
you describe what you mean by capacious?
Let me put
My
it this way,
crib
look
is
at all 9
capacious.
verbs together, and you're looking at a
My
spectrum
mind
of
is
powers from the
capacious.
most
Oh,
sort
wait,
of
what, that
negative,
bad? Did I
nullify,
use it
block,
right?
prohibit, void, to the most
Capacious.
affirmative, direct, compel,
Capacious.
and then also powers in between that are more intermediate, regulate, investigate, and so forth. So the natural common sense inference from that
Capacious.
grammatical structure is the intention of Congress to sort of cover the waterfront.
Well,
to grant the
possible,
power all.
General, possible, except Congress did take out a
Able
whole
to
bunch
hold
of
a lot?
verbs.
Long term.
They took out confiscate, vest, hold, use,
Met Sarah,
administer,
you
liquidate,
got a lot yesterday,
sell,
but not
which
today,
were
now it's
in the
moving.
prior statute.
All right, Meta, things are looking good, brothers. Even Netflix
crucially,
now.
what it doesn't have here is anything that refers to raising revenue. So it has a lot of verbs, it has a lot of actions that can be taken under this statute. It just doesn't have the one you want.
Well, I would say the notion that all these other verbs are sort of not revenue-raising, like block and prohibit, I think that argument is unconvincing for two reasons. One, of course, is that we're not saying it confers a revenue-raising power. We're saying it confers a regulatory power, and that's a crucial distinction. But also...
Yes, but if I can just stop you there, regulatory power, I mean, yes, it says regulate, but I'll broaden out Justice Barrett's question. Is there any place that you can find in the entire code where regulate, used just as regulate, includes taxing power?
We don't assert that. We say it includes tariffing power when it's combined with importation, and that's just the most natural.
Right, because the natural understanding of regulate, even though in fact we can regulate through taxes, but when the code uses regulate, we don't typically understand it to refer to duties or taxes or tariffs or anything of the kind. And then if you look at the flip side of this, and you look at all the tariff statutes that Congress has passed, I mean, they use language about revenue raising, tariffs and duties and taxes. All the language that does not appear in the statute you rely on.
Start with the sort of grammatical structure of the statute, then refer to the other statutes. Regulate importation. You put those two words in combination. That's the inference from that is, the founders discussed with this sort of like, as everyone knows attitude. Regulate importation, one of the most natural applications of that is the power to tariff. So when Congress confers the power to regulate imports, it is naturally conferring the power to tariff, which it has delegated to the executive branch, again and again and again.
I'm sorry, counsel. It doesn't say regulate tariffs. It says regulate importations and exportations. You agree that they can't put taxes on exportations.
From the states, yeah, we agree with that, yes.
All right. So why should we think that it's natural then to think that regulate importation includes taxing?
So what do you guys notice here?
Because
equal weight stop moving.
In the conjunctive.
So this is a lot of the tech getting a bid. It's kind of broad, but
if they can't
so
do
far
it
you're holding a smaller amount of broadening out though. So that little second half of this is really just the big caps.
To importations?
There's a couple of non-big caps.
As this court has recognized, going back
HD
to against Ogden and going through McGoldrick and Board of Trustees, the phrase, when you're regulating imports, tariffing is a core application of that. So in other words, if you're saying go regulate trading in securities, that doesn't come with a tariffing connotation.
Why is it that Congress has always used regulate and tax together in the code? Are you telling us that with respect to its use of regulate in other statutes, the taxing reference is superfluous? They didn't need to do that?
I'm not sure what other statutes use regulate and tax together, but this statute has a specific historical pedigree going back to its enactment during World War I in 1917, where the phrase regulate importation is evoking an inherent power to tariff that became established in the 19th century in cases like Hamilton against Dillon and so forth, and that history is, I think, set forth in Professor Baumsei's amicus brief.
Counsel, some time ago you dismissed the applicability of the major questions doctrine.
Oh, that's oil numbers. Crude inventory 5.2 million. Estimate withdrawal of 286,000.
It might be directly
Cushing
applicable.
300
You
versus
have
1.3 last.
a claim source, an IEPA, that had never before been used to justify tariffs. No one has argued that it does.
You think it's bullish? You haven't heard anything that says, you have a point here?
Congress uses tariffs
it's
and
not,
other provisions.
just in general,
but not here.
I think you could have known that prior.
And correct
it's just
me
a
on this
matter
if I'm
of,
not
the authority,
right
and if they actually stop it. I think this was all just a filibuster in a weird way, but up until recently, when was the last time you saw judges get in the way of policy this much?
That seems like I'm not suggesting
unfortunately,
it's not there,
this one was
but
surprising when we first heard it, but even then, this is
for.
All right, sorry, guy. This is what I reminded everybody of this morning is that if you guys recall, Scott Bessent has already talked about this, and they said even if they clap it, they're gonna have another way to go around it and do it. So it's all of this doesn't. I don't really think any of this has legs, but it is important in the sense that it actually came up and we had to deal with it. But yeah, this isn't like you could. I mean, if you are listening, this.
But it uses the word regulate.
I'd say it's more rare that
historically
judges are trying to stop this action than this action, even if it was aggressive by Donald Trump.
If you had asked the founders, how do you regulate imports?
Yeah, Meta's killing it, man.
So it'd be very unusual to say, we're giving you power to regulate importation, and say, but you cannot impose regulatory tariffs. That'd be almost a contradiction. And all the historical sources we cited, I believe, relate to that particular
but I don't like it, though.
As I was referring to
so
earlier,
even those Qualcomms, they didn't move on the way up. They got killed on the way down. There's a couple good Metas, but they're not moving.
And President McKinley,
we're talking 10% on a couple, on what, $5 move?
That was then codified in TWIA.
That's terrible.
And then recodified for peacetime in TWIA in 1933.
So it's still not hot, you guys. It's actually still pretty bad. We got to move.
More importantly, if you look at the sort of triggering conditions that
underlying
members of
looks
this court
pretty
have
decent
identified
today.
For the major questions doctrine,
but
there's
it's
a
still
series
early,
of
so give it, like I said, another 20 minutes.
Here. For example,
if
the
it
notion
doesn't
that power
flip
is
bad, then
unheralded.
it'll give you better signs of life.
The fact that IEEPA has never been asserted to invoke tariffs, but of course, the immediately predecessor statute, the tariffs that President Nixon imposed on that were upheld under this very language. So this, I would say this is, and it was recodified in IEEPA 2 years later. So this is kind of the opposite of unheralded power. It's also heralded because there's this long-standing delegation, a tradition of very broad delegations of the foreign commerce power going back to the founding, going back to
foreign commerce part, but I mean, and I think this is a question for the other side as well. It's two-facing. Yes, of course, tariffs and dealings with foreign powers, but the vehicle is imposition of taxes on Americans, and that has always been the core power of Congress. So to have the president's foreign affairs power trump that basic power
if you
for
change
Congress,
the definition of tariff to a tax, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to change the fucking word.
Neutralize between the two
that's what he's saying.
powers, the executive power and the legislative
That's kind of nonsense.
Let me say two things in response to that. First, the notion that the taxes are all borne by Americans and are not borne by foreign producers whose goods are imported is empirically, there's no basis for that in the record. It's actually a mixed.
Well, who pays the tariffs? If a tariff is imposed on automobiles,
it feels like the electrolyte comment.
Typically, there'd be regardless of who the importer of record is, there'd be a contract that would go along the sort of line of transfer that would allocate the tariff, and there'd be different. Sometimes the foreign producer would pay them. Sometimes the importer would bear the cost.
IMSR, energy play at 14 already looks like that. Eli Lilly.
A wholly owned American subsidiary of a foreign corporation. So it gets allocated. The empirical estimates range from like 30% to 80% of like how much is borne by American
it's been suggested that the tariffs are responsible for significant reduction in our deficit. I would say that's raising revenue domestically.
There certainly is an incidental and collateral effect of the tariffs that they do raise revenue, but it's very important that they are regulatory tariffs, not revenue-raising tariffs. And the way you can see this, I think, if you look at this policy is by far the most effective if nobody ever pays the tariffs. I say two policies, right? So if you look at the trade deficit emergency, if nobody ever pays the tariffs and instead Americans direct their consumption towards American producers and stimulate the rebuilding of our hollowed-out manufacturing base, then the policy is by far the most effective. So a tariff, a regulatory tariff that...
Why not do what the statute permits? Bar importation of products altogether. That would be the most effective way to do it.
What the question?
You follow the statute. The statute
that was a good
says the
follow-up. He
president
put
can
himself
do
in
that. What it doesn't say is the president can
but I like what he
raise
said.
revenue.
You're saying it doesn't tax.
What it says is he can regulate importation and go back for hundreds of years the way you regulate
quotas, causing it, subjecting some countries and not others to importation bans.
Can't stand how lawyers dance around words. I feel you.
Verbs.
That's why I said you better get your spiritual lawyer.
Generating
they don't
revenue
feel me.
as
Imagine.
a side effect or directly.
Let me address that verb point, if I may, because think about the canonical example, a statute that refers to a list of swords, knives, daggers, dirks, and pikes. There you look at that list of things and you say, aha, those are all weapons, therefore a pike is a spear, not a fish in that particular context. Now look at this list of verbs, block, prohibit, compel, direct, and so forth. You don't look at that naturally as an ordinary reader and say, oh, look, they're all not revenue raising. What you say is they're all very broad, powerful, actions of the
General, the verbs that are in the statute are actually
No, it was a good
follow-up
because he was saying
they're in the
you can't call it a tax because if you operate
Congress
and you follow through with it, nobody would pay anything. But then she's saying, okay,
Senate
then why not
report
ban
and
all
House
imports?
When it enacted
which is a very good, that's a logical follow-up. She got him on that.
What it was doing, it said that what we are doing is authorizing the president, in the Senate report, quote, to control or freeze property transactions where a foreign interest is involved. There's similar language about controlling, freezing control in the House report. So I appreciate that generally you can look at these words and you can imagine that they mean certain things, but here we have evidence that Congress was actually trying to do a particular thing with respect to the authority that it was presenting to the president, and that thing was not raising revenue.
I think that the powers that Congress was conferring on the president are best understood through the plain text of the statute.
Hey, Eli Lilly again, bro.
No, but some of us care about the legislative history. And so the plain text of the statute has certain verbs in it. It also has regulate commerce, as you said.
It has regulate commerce.
And when I look at the legislative history, it appears as though Congress was trying to give the president the authority to, quote, control or freeze property transactions where a foreign interest is involved. And in the TWIA context, that makes perfect sense because we're talking about a wartime dynamic. And what is happening is the president needs the authority to prevent trading with the enemy in the midst of a war. And that seems to be the focus of this statute. So I guess I'm concerned about just sort of taking a particular word here and there and saying that the general view of it might include raising revenue when in fact it looks as though the aim of this
I think they're having something today too. Yeah, it was yesterday and today.
Kind
of VKTX.
To freeze the
and then they had the government thing with NVO, and then NVO didn't do good.
As the notion
so
that this
then
is
they're
a
eating the lunch.
revenue-raising tactic or power, it is not. We are asserting a regulatory power. It's a delegation of the power to regulate foreign commerce. The way to control imports traditionally has been to tariff them. They say, well, you can impose quotas. Well, quotas are essentially economically equivalent to tariffs. So the question is, why would you be able to quota under-regulate but not tariff under-regulate when the tariffs are themselves regulatory? And let me turn back to the question the response I was giving to the Chief Justice to illustrate that.
Could the answer be that in other places where Congress wants that particular form of regulation to be used, they say impose duties. They say you can tax, Mr. President. Here they don't say that.
I'd say two things in response to that. That's the very argument that this court rejected in Algonquin. That the fact that these other specific statutes
if we disagree with you about
way, you have to use
if we
it this
disagree
way.
with you that Algonquin is a similar context, do you have another statute or another circumstance?
And again, not to cite Algonquin again, but obviously we discussed the phrase adjust imports. And they said, the natural way to do that is to tariff them. And they specifically said it makes no sense at all to authorize quotas, which was conceded that statute did authorize, but not tariffs, because those are equivalent.
But it said adjust by any means necessary, which kind of beefs up the adjust. And also, and this is actually, I just don't know the answer to this question, so maybe you can help and maybe the other side can help as well. Algonquin was very careful to always call it a license and a licensing fee, and in the oral argument that came up too, the distinction between a tariff and a licensing fee. And I can understand how in some contexts it would be very difficult. You would press on it and you would say, well, if this license fee is raising revenue, then it actually functions as a tariff. But what is the significance of that? Because in IEPA, it also says, it refers particularly to licenses. It says you can license. And license would be a way of giving permission. That's actually the language also used in the Civil War one, and what is it?
Hamilton against Dillon.
Yeah.
Exactly, yes, it does.
It was a license, it was a license fee, and that's a way to grant permission that you wouldn't otherwise have to trade and import and let it through. So tell me what the distinction is between licenses and fees and if it matters.
It's hard for me to see one, because what President Lincoln said is, okay, we're going to allow imports from hostile foreign powers, basically rebellious Confederate states, of cotton subject to a license, but you got to pay 4 cents a pound on cotton when you do it. That's the condition. That is so nearly equivalent to a tariff that says you can bring these goods into our country, but you got to pay a ad valorem assessment on it. And of course, they have in their briefs conceded that quotas apply, that licensing may apply. There is the language in the beginning of 1701 that talks about instruments, or other methods, instruments, licenses.
But if that were true, why couldn't you just call this a license? And it's also true that in the cotton example, the court said the exaction itself was not properly a tax, but a bonus required as a condition precedent for engaging in the trade. So it seems like it was a little squirrely about how it was proceeding. And if there really is no distinction, why couldn't you just call it a license here?
Very briefly, the other two cases, the Polk case and then the President McKinley case, talk about duties. So I see an equivalence there, Mr. Chief Justice.
Thank you, counsel. Justice Thomas, anything further?
The other side is going to make an argue on delegation, I believe. Would you anticipate that and give us your understanding of the delegation argument?
Yes, Justice Thomas. I'd say a couple things in response to that. First of all, this court has stated that the non-delegation doctrine does not apply with anything like the same force as it does in the domestic context in the foreign context. And that, again, to cite Dames and Moore again, Dames and Moore cites Youngstown, and Youngstown in footnote 2 of Justice Jackson's opinion, he goes into detail about this. He addresses Curtis Wright. He says there's a lot of broad dicta in Curtis Wright, but the holding of Curtis Wright, the ratio dissidenti, is that the domestic non-delegation doctrine does not apply with the same force in the foreign context. And then he uses that phrase, does not apply. He says the strict limitations on delegation that apply, in the internal context do not apply in the external context. And
all right, dude, that's another Sherwin-Williams Home Depot. These like home improvement places or home maintenance products going down. Again, Staples not hot today, even though you're going up. A lot of it tech on the second half. There's Micron.
A few times you have alluded to the history.
I think it's more getting back to tech rally than not, or what you lost the last couple days.
Statute.
Is RH too?
Also that this language
I was looking at HD. That was kind of random.
Trading
but
with
now
the
Sherwin, all of them.
And then
biotech, healthcare, they're doing decent.
Could you
XLV
just
would be
sketch
better
out
without
this
Humana.
direct line that you were alluding to as a basis for interpreting the current emergency statute as you would like it interpreted?
Yes, Justice Thomas, and turning back to the response I was giving to Justice Barrett earlier, there is, I think it's very well set out in Professor Baumsei's amicus brief, there is this history of presidents using a tariffing power or a tariff equivalent power, very, very close to tariffing power, in wartime to tariff trading with enemies. And that is when the Trading with the Enemy Act was enacted in 1917, it was deliberately evoking that. And when it brings in the power to regulate importation, it's essentially codifying for an inherent power the president's already recognized to have. And then in 1933, when that power is expanded to an area where he wouldn't inherently have it, the peacetime context, that codification, the meaning of that remains the same. The regulated importation language that's brought in from TWIA and then ultimately to IEPA in 1977 is carrying with it that connotation, and that's reinforced by all the cases we've cited in our brief where there's been extremely broad delegations of the power to tariff specifically and the power to regulate foreign commerce more generally, going back to the time of the founding, which ties to your question about non-delegation.
All right, I'm going to go get
Justice
water.
Alito?
BRB.
The court of the CCPA said things in Yoshida that are helpful to your position, but it also said some other things. It said that future surcharges, quote, must of course comply with Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, and it said that the Trading with the Enemy Act did not authorize the president to, quote, fix rates of duty at will without regard to statutory rates prescribed by Congress. So do you think that Congress, to the extent Congress had that decision in mind and relied on it, do you think it also relied on those statements in the opinion?
Not in the same way, because those statements are read into other provisions of TWIA that Congress did not enact in NEPA. They may still be there in TWIA, but those are limitations that it wouldn't make sense to do. And I think the significance of Yoshida is at a higher level. Keep in mind that their principal position is no tariffs at all. Regulated importation just doesn't carry a connotation of the power to tariff. And we say we've got historical sources going back to Gibbons against Ogden that say the opposite. But more fundamentally, everyone knew that at the time IEPA was enacted that regulated importation had just very visibly and very prominently been upheld to include a sweeping global tariff.
Thank you.
Mr. Sotomayor?
I'd like to go back to Justice Barrett's question on the word license as used in IEPA. It's not used as a verb, it's used as a noun. The president may, under such regulations as he may prescribe, by means of instructions, licenses, or otherwise, then do what the verbs permit him to do. By license, he can nullify, void, prevent, or prohibit any acquisition, etc. So license is not being used as a verb that through licensing he can raise revenue. He can only use licenses to accomplish the verbs. So I don't understand how we can treat licensing as equivalent to revenue raising. As used in IEPA, the license is only to accomplish what B permits.
In Hamilton against Dillon, licenses, once you had the license, then you had to pay the fees, the license fees to get it in.
That's the point I'm making, which is that the only use of license here is a noun. You can license to accomplish the powers that B gives the president.
Let me be clear. We rely on the phrase regulate importation. We're not saying that
exactly. You're not relying on licenses for that reason.
No, I only cite that language, that introductory language about, instruments, licenses, or otherwise as another layer of breadth in this particular
Counsel,
statute.
would you listen to my question? You're not relying on license for the reason I just said, because it is a noun, not the verb. You're relying on regulate, correct?
Yes, we're relying on regulate importation.
Right. And despite the fact that no other president in the history of IEPA has ever used tariffs as a power under IEPA.
Well, President Nixon did so
under a predecessor, and we have all the limitations of that. All right. Number two, whenever Congress intends to permit taxing and regulate, it uses the word tax and regulate in every other statute, correct?
I don't concede that. I mean, two very visible examples, again, are TWIA and Section 122.
We're back to the question here. Okay, thank you, Counsel.
Justice Sotomayor?
No, she's Justice Sotomayor. Yeah. She just finished.
Justice Kagan?
General
and they're friends?
I want to take you back to Justice Thomas's question about non-delegation, and if I understood your answer correctly, it was really similar to the answer that you started off with when you talked with Justice Thomas about the major questions doctrine, which is sort of everything's different because the president has independent constitutional powers in this area. And so that if one does not think that with respect to tariffs, if one thinks that a tariff is a taxing power, is a regulation of foreign commerce that is really delegated by the Constitution to Congress, that argument does not sound so well. And in fact, when you look at J.W. Hampton, which gives rise to the non-delegation test that we usually use, J.W. Hampton is a tariffs case. And the court did not say, oh, we need some special new principle here, some stricter rule because we're dealing with tariffs in which presidents are directly concerned as a matter of foreign relations. It enunciated the test we use for all non-delegations. So how does that fit with your theory?
8 years later, in Curtis Wright, the court held the non-delegation doctrine for domestic affairs does not apply with the same force as it does in foreign affairs.
But not with respect to tariffs, not with respect to quintessential taxing powers, which are given by the Constitution to Congress.
I think justices of this court have recognized in their opinions that one of the reasons that the non-delegation doctrine, that intelligible principle test hasn't packed as much punch as Justice Kavanaugh said in one of his opinions as it might otherwise have done, is it did arise in the foreign affairs context, because there the court has historically been very, very comfortable with very broad delegations. Chicago and Southern Airlines, another case from the 1930s, shortly after J.W. Hampton talked about being very large delegations of the foreign commerce power being very effective. And of course, this goes back to the very dawn of the Republic in 1790, for example. Congress conferred on President Washington basically the entire Indian commerce power. It said, go, get licenses, right, to do commerce with the Indians, and they'll be subject to whatever rules and regulations President Washington can make. So I do think there is a profound consistency between the announcement of the intelligible principle test in J.W. Hampton and then the subsequent recognition by this court in Curtis Wright that the non-delegation doctrine doesn't apply to the same force in this context.
In Consumers Research just last year, we had a tax before us, and the question was this a delegation issue? It was, of course, a much smaller tax, which dealt with many fewer taxpayers. Notwithstanding that, we said if there's no ceiling on this tax, we sort of assumed that if there were no ceiling on this tax, it would raise a delegation problem. And most of the opinion was given over to showing that there, in fact, was a ceiling on the tax, not a quantitative one, but a qualitative one. But how does your argument fit with the idea that a tax with no ceiling, a tax that can be anything.
No ceiling.
That here the president wants, there an agency wants, would raise a pretty deep delegation problem.
First of all, I can't say enough, it is a regulatory tariff, not a tax. And that, I think, ties to my response to that, which is that this is a totally different context. This is IEPA, a statute that Congress carefully crafted to grant the president admittedly broad powers to address foreign arising emergencies.
Bro, my girlfriend's
It's
listening.
to foreign affairs, where there's
And
the
she's
broadest
tripping
level of
out.
deference to the political branches.
She's like, wait a minute.
In many cases,
There's no requirements to be a Supreme Court justice?
Be imposed very naturally because, for example,
I'm like, yeah, baby girl, you can be whatever you want.
Hamilton in the Federalist number 23,
that's what I'm trying to tell her.
It's impossible to foresee.
And she's like, or you're gonna have to move to Switzerland if they keep fucking. I'm like, yeah, maybe.
That may be required to address
you know that, right?
Instead,
all of you. The Supreme Court, it's all appointed.
To a particular domain.
There's no citizenship requirement. There's no age requirement. There's no requirement at all.
National thereof has any interest.
You're listening to this is the Supreme Court. That's why we're listening. It's pretty cool.
Say you shouldn't, but if you would apply the non-delegation doctrine, the domestic-facing non-delegation doctrine in this context, there's a significant limitation there.
Yeah. So my last question really does have to do with that point, which is how or whether this is confined. Because if you look at Title 19, which is loaded with tariffs and duties of various kinds, all of them have real constraints on them. They are, you can't go over X percent, or it can't last more than 1 year. And of course, the way you interpret this statute, it has none of those constraints. And the question arises why it is that any president ever would look to the tariffs in Title 19 if sub silentio, if you will, this statute gives the president the opportunity to blow past those limits.
This statute has its own constraints. They are constraints that are appropriate for the context, which is internationally arising emergencies. They are carefully crafted by Congress to address that, and they are individually different. They're in Section 1701. The president has to make a formal declaration of a national emergency, which subjects him to particularly intensive oversight by Congress, natural lapsing, repeated review, reports, and so forth. It says you have to consult with Congress to the maximum.
I mean, you
possible.
yourself think that the declaration of emergency is unreviewable, and even if it's not unreviewable, it's of course the kind of determination that this court would grant considerable deference to the president on. So that doesn't seem like much of a constraint.
But it is.
And in fact, we've had cases recently which deals with the president's emergency powers, and it turns out we're in emergencies everything all the time about like half the world.
Well, this particular emergency is particularly existential, as Executive Order 14257 says, and of course, no one disputes the existential nature of the fentanyl crisis, which, we had an agreement last week to create progress on, which illustrates the effectiveness of the terrorist tool here. But the point I would make in response to that is, those are, even if there's limited judicial review, which is very natural in the foreign affairs context, this court has always granted the president the presumption that he's acting in good faith. There are real hurdles there, very significant. It's got to be an unusual, extraordinary threat that arises in whole or substantial part outside the United States, so it's entirely foreign-facing into the national security, economy, or foreign policy of the United States. So there are those. Then there's 1701B, which talks about how it can be used for this and for no other purpose. Then there are limitations in Section 1702B. Then there is the limitations I was referring to earlier about what he can actually do. He can do a heck of a lot, but only when he's dealing with property in which foreigners have an interest, and that's a pretty narrow domain. That's quite a silo, so to speak. And then, of course, overarching it all, there's congressional oversight, and you may say congressional oversight may not have much bite, but Congress didn't think so. Congress crafted this compromise. It balanced the never-ending tension. When it drafted AEPA, it had its eyes open. As the dissent below says, its eyes open looking at the problem of sweeping emergency powers for an executive who may use them in a way that's excessive versus the need to address unforeseeable
emergencies. Thank you, General.
Justice Gorsuch.
General, just a few questions following up on the major questions discussions you've had.
It's the general?
You say that we shouldn't be so concerned in the area of foreign affairs because of the president's inherent powers. That's the gist of it, as I understand it, why we should disregard both major questions and non-delegation. So could Congress delegate to the president the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations as he sees fit? To lay and collect duties as he sees fit?
We don't assert that here. That would be a much harder case now in 1790.
Isn't that the logic of your view, though?
I don't think so, because we're dealing with a statute that was a carefully crafted compromise. It does have all the limitations that I just talked about.
You're saying we shouldn't be concerned with. I want to explain to me how you draw the line, because you say we shouldn't be concerned because this is foreign affairs and the president has inherent authority, and so delegation off the books, more or less. And if that's true, what would prohibit Congress from just abdicating all responsibility to regulate foreign commerce?
Trump big speech at 1 p.m. in Miami. Tune in.
Matter, declare war to the president.
That sucks, though. We're not down yet.
We don't pretend that he could do that.
Why not?
Well, because we're dealing with a statute, again, that has a whole...
I'm not asking about the statute. General, I'm not asking about the statute. I'm asking for your theory of the Constitution and why the major questions in non-delegation, what bite it would have in that case.
Yes, I would say by then you had moved from the area where there's enormous deference to the president, actually both the political branches, where here there's inherent authority, and piled on top of that there's a broad delegation.
You're saying there's inherent authority in foreign affairs, all foreign affairs. So regulate commerce, duties, and tariffs and war. It's inherent authority all the way down, you say. Fine. Congress decides tomorrow, well, we're tired of this legislating business. We're just going to hand it all off to the president. What would stop Congress from doing that?
That would be different than a situation where there are metes and bounds, so to speak. It would be a wholesale application.
You say we are not here to judge metes and bounds when the foreign affairs. That's what I'm struggling with. You'd have to have some test. And if it isn't the intelligible principle test or something more with more bite than that, you're saying it's something less. Well, what is that less?
I think what the court has said in its opinions is just that it applies with much less force, more limited application in this context. So perhaps the right to approach it is a very, very deferential application of the intelligible principle test, that sort of wholesale application of...
All right, so now you're admitting that there is some non-delegation principle at play here, and therefore major questions as well. Is that right?
Very limited, very, very deferential. Okay. Limited is what, and again, the phrase that Justice Jackson uses, it just does not apply, at least.
I know, but that's where you started off, and now you've retreated from that, as I understand it.
Well, I think we would, as our frontline position, assert the stronger position, but if the court doesn't accept it, then if there is a highly deferential...
Can you give me a reason to accept it, though? That's what I'm struggling and waiting for. What's the reason to accept the notion that Congress can hand off the power to declare war to the president?
Well, we don't contend that. Again, that would
well, you do. You say it's unreviewable. There's no manageable standard, nothing to be done. And now you're, I think you, tell me if I'm wrong. You backed off that position.
Maybe that's fair to say.
Okay, all right.
That would be, I think, an abdication. That would really be an abdication, not a delegation.
I'm delighted to hear that, you know. Okay. All right, and then I wanted to return to something Justice Sotomayor asked under this statute, okay? So now we're in the statute. It's a major question, though. Could the president impose a 50% tariff on gas-powered cars and auto parts to deal with the unusual and extraordinary threat from abroad of climate change?
It's very likely that that could be done. Very likely.
I think that has to be the logic of your view.
Yeah, in other words, obviously this administration would say that's a hoax, it's not a real crisis, but...
I'm sure you would.
Yes, but that would be a question for Congress under our interpretation, not for the courts.
All right. And then on this inherent authority idea, I understand the president's inherent authority in wartime, and a lot of your examples of regulating commerce, and maybe your best one, Hamilton, during the Civil War, they occurred during wartime when the president's commander-in-chief power is clearly in play. Does the president have inherent authority over tariffs in peacetime?
No, we do not contend that.
Okay.
And in fact, I'd cite, if I may, I'd point the court to two cases. They're Loving against United States and then Masery that's cited in Loving. Those are situations, for example, Loving against United States, the president had broad Article II inherent authority. There was the commander-in-chief power. But this court held he does not have inherent authority to do the power that was delegated to him, right, which is the power to, identify aggravators that make you eligible for the death penalty in court-martial trials. And yet this court said, well, we're not going to see a delegation problem here, even though it's really
all right, a couple things moving around. I see a lot of energy and oil. You saw the other stuff on the low with like the staples at home.
Because you're in a
and then chips are like the little middle ground leading with a couple of tech names.
Delegation of authority. He doesn't have the power to do this, but because of his background inherent authority, the court said this is a situation where we're not going to see a delegation problem when there clearly would have been a delegation problem in the domestic context. And those cases, I think, are powerful here.
General, if I can cut through those words, I think you're saying that no, the president doesn't have inherent authority over tariffs in peacetime.
Absolutely. That is, we do not assert that. We say that Congress can delegate that to him, and when Congress does so, as it does when it uses the phrase regulate importation.
I follow all of that. Okay. You emphasize that Congress can always take back its powers. You mentioned that a couple of times. But don't we have a serious retrieval problem here? Because once Congress delegates by a bare majority and the president signs it, and of course every president will sign a law that gives him more authority, Congress can't take that back without a supermajority. And even then, it's going to be veto proof. What president's ever going to give that power back? Pretty rare president. So how should that inform our view of delegations and major questions?
I would look at the balance that Congress struck, because what Congress did initially, it had a two-house legislative veto,
and we struck that down.
And then Congress went back to the statute and amended it. It took out the legislative veto and left in the joint resolution, but still left the president with all those powers.
That's what Congress did?
Yes.
Fair enough. As a practical matter in the real world.
Yeah, I think it took like extra 5% there.
I disagree, because in January 2023, Congress voted to terminate one of the biggest IEEPA emergencies ever, the COVID emergency, and the president went along with that. So what the statute reflects is there's going to be the ability for a sort of political consensus against a declared emergency.
Well, what happens when the president
That's your new governor of Virginia, dog.
Legislation to try to take these powers
That's the NAACP
well, he has the authority
nominee.
To veto legislation to terminate a national emergency, for example. I mean, he retains the powers in the background because IEEPA is still on the books. But if
That's
he
dope, though. I wanted to get that
Congress
Dyson one. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
I can't afford that.
Congress
for
is a
fucking air
practical
filter
matter,
on my
can't get
mask
this
thing,
power
like,
back once it's handed over to the president. It's a one-way ratchet toward the gradual but continual accretion of power in the executive branch and away from the people's elected representatives.
No, I think that was a couple weeks ago.
The recent historical counterexample of Congress's termination of the COVID emergency demonstrates that the political oversight
with the president's assent.
Meaningful.
With the president's assent, in fact,
once he lost it by a veto-proof majority in the Senate, I think the position moved. And I think he realized, and that's the political process working. There was a political
it takes a supermajority, a veto-proof majority to get it back. Yeah. Okay. One other question. Do you think tariffs are always foreign affairs?
I do think they would. I can't think of a situation where they're not foreign-facing. If you're talking about tariffs on imports, I mean, maybe there are other tariff contexts that I'm not aware of, but yes, they typically would involve a foreign affairs thing. However, as in Gibbons against Ogden, if they are revenue-raising tariffs, they would not raise the same sort of like foreign affairs issues as regulatory tariffs, which are imposed not for the purpose of raising revenue, but to induce foreign powers to change their behaviors.
So revenue-raising tariffs are not foreign affairs, but regulatory tariffs are.
I don't think a revenue-raising tariff would be foreign
Fed
affairs.
Moran, better expected ADP data was welcome surprise.
Would raise the same issues.
And OpenAI, more than 1 million businesses around the world are directly using OpenAI.
Figuring out what regulate importation means is
short
obviously central here. And for major question purposes, I think the way we think about that kind of question is, does the specific authority, power, major power, now asserted pursuant to that general statutory authorization, was that the kind of power that would have been understood by people, by Congress at the time the general statute was passed, as distinct from being a novel kind of use of that general authority to do something different? Unheralded is the word in our cases. Okay. One problem you have is that President since IEEPA had not done this.
What was the other one?
Primary answer, or one of your many answers to that, is the Nixon example. And that's a good example for you, because Nixon relied on regulate importation to impose a worldwide tariff. Good example. What is our understanding of Congress in 1977 vis-a-vis that Nixon example when Congress reenacts or enacts the regulate importation language into IEEPA?
Congress at that time was fully aware that a Court of Appeals with exclusive jurisdiction had interpreted that very phrase very visibly, very prominently to include the power to tariff, and then reenacted it without change. The court addressed a kind of lesser situation in Algonquin when it came to Section 122, and the court said President Nixon interpreted this to include a tariffing power, a tariffing-like power, and then Congress a few months later reenacted the language without change, and that's powerful evidence of congressional acquiescence. So that immediately historical background is very powerful, and it's buttressed, of course, by sources going back to the founding, where we say the phrase regulated importation, a quintessential application of that is the power to tariff. That's how you regulate.
Why, this may require some speculation on your part, economic philosophy, et cetera, but I'll ask it. Why do you think Presidents Clinton, Bush, Obama have not used IEEPA to impose tariffs on, because there have been trade disputes, and certainly President Bush, steel imports and the like. Why do you think IEEPA has not been used?
If you look at those 69 emergencies, in fact, you go through them one at a time, which we had our team do, it's really hard to find one where you look at that emergency and you say, oh, tariffs is the natural tool you would use to address that emergency. So, for example, the Blood Diamond emergency, tariffing these sort of, criminal organizations in Africa that are financing terrorism through the sale of diamonds, you don't really tariff them. Or you take, the Iranian hostage crisis. President Carter didn't say, oh, you've seized all of our, embassy personnel, you're holding them hostage, we're going to tariff you, right? And if you go through those emergencies, there are two emergencies, though, where tariffs are the obvious natural tool for a president to use. One is the Nixon balance of payments deficit problem, and the other is this particular emergency. And also there's political reasons. I think that it's no question that President Trump is by far the most comfortable with the tariffs as a tool, both of, economic and foreign policy, than many of the others presidents may have been. I mean, there are presidents like President Bush who, probably wouldn't have naturally, selected that particular tool or method. But if you go through all 69
I don't even know what a tariff is.
What they have not done, at
what
least,
do you mean,
is they have
tariff?
not identified, they say, oh,
I know
here's
Longhorns.
What tariffs would have been the obvious tool, but the president didn't use
Congress. I thought it was
Algonquin, as you've mentioned many times, is obviously very important here for us to understand exactly what's going on in Algonquin. The phrase there is different, adjust imports, and they really, the other side, your friend on the other side, really relies on the difference in language. And I just want you to give your best answer to why regulate importation encompasses tariffs when we held that adjust imports would encompass
LMT is down, and then you had the NOC stuff. All the defense teams kind of got clapped,
if I may.
Except RTX and Bobo. Nope, Bobo got clapped.
And so, therefore, the writer includes the last. Second answer, adjust is the second Black's Law Dictionary definition of regulate. The Black's Law Dictionary, our original plain meaning dictionary definition, says adjust by rule, mode, or rule, method, or established mode. So there's just a plain meaning link there. Regulate, adjust is a kind of regulation. And then I think far more importantly, regulate importation. I can't emphasize enough. Going back to the time of the founding has been understood that the manner in which you regulate importation, the natural way to do that is to tariff. So it would be textually astonishing, given that historical pedigree, going back to Gibbons, going back to Madison's letter to Cabell, and all the historical sources cited in our briefs. It'd be kind of astonishing to say, hey, President, you can regulate imports, but we're not saying this explicitly, but you do not have the power to tariff, when the tariffing is in many ways the quintessential way of regulating importation. So that historical pedigree sort of gives freighted meaning to that two-word phrase.
How long has it been going on for like an hour and a half?
You had some discussion about license fee
about an hour,
versus
hour 9.
Tariffs, if there's a distinction. I mean, the counsel in the oral argument, Algonquin, said they're all monies exacted on imports, so in that sense, it certainly is a tariff, and hence all the incidents and the economic effect of a tariff. But we can't rely on what the counsel said in Algonquin. Isn't there a difference of sorts, at least, between a tariff and a license fee? You answered
this the Supreme Court oral argument.
I want to make sure, because I think this could be an important point, because I want to know Algonquin to decide this case.
Where the court wants to limit 60%
I agree that
of Trump's tariffs, and even
there's a formal
possibly order him to send the money back.
counsel was probably arguing there is that there really isn't much of an important distinction. And I would point to the passage in Algonquin where the court says, look, they've conceded that this includes the power to quota, and since quotas are a quantitative method, it would make no sense for Congress not to grant the qualitative method, and all the more so here if there's a concession, as they do in some of the red briefs.
One time the court said monetary methods, i.e. license fees, and the next page said monetary exactions, i.e. license fees and duties.
I think the court bought the argument.
It's important to be consistent.
That there's really not a lot of daylight between those two. As a practical matter, certainly almost no daylight. And so then the question...
When you say almost no daylight, just...
Do you mean the afternoon?
They're economic equivalents. Legally, they're pretty much the same. So I really don't see a big distinction there. And of course, the logic of Algonquin was, quantitative methods quotas are allowed. Therefore, it would make no sense at all to interpret this not to include the qualitative or the monetary exaction methods. Well, if we're talking about a distinction between regulated importation, including licenses that can come with fees, but not tariffs, that logic applies all the more so.
Thank you.
It makes no sense.
Justice Barrett?
Well, I think in Algonquin, there was a formal distinction that mattered because at that oral argument, counsel pointed out that the uniformity clause would kick in and the constitutional uniformity requirement would apply to tariffs if it was that way, and speculated that the reason that the government may have set it up as a licensing scheme with licensing fees was to avoid that. So I do think there are some distinctions, but keeping that in mind, if you say that there really is, as a practical matter, no difference.
It is. There's been some good back and forth, and you're at least getting to see where their heads at with all of it.
So in IEPA, Justice Sotomayor is right. License is used as a noun, but it's one of the means necessary. So in Algonquin, it was by any means necessary adjust. Here the statute says the president may, under such regulations as he may prescribe, by means of instructions, licenses, or otherwise, regulate importation, which is the key part for our purposes. So the means it specifies are instructions, licenses, or otherwise. So I think it would, one argument might be that it would have been natural for Congress to put the president may, by means of instructions, licenses, tariffs, or otherwise. With an adjustum generis thing, I think you have to rely on the or otherwise, picking up more. Or if there really is no practical difference between licenses and tariffs, why aren't you making the argument, or why didn't the president structure this as a licensing fee scheme? How do I understand that language? Or am I just misunderstanding it and this language is totally irrelevant?
I think that, here's the way I'd respond to that. I think that language powerfully
I hope all of this language could be viewed as irrelevant
because first of all, regulated importation.
Student loan delinquencies rise to record 14.4. Quickly, move to New York City.
To list tariffing again.
Don't worry, the rent will be free, but move there.
Especially if you look at the specific historical background of TWIA, where TWIA was enacting a tariffing power or a licensing-like power, that was described as, again, duties and tariffs equivalently.
Okay, but I don't understand because I think you have to put together A1 and then B. So I think what you would be saying is he may prescribe by means of tariffs.
I think what you're saying is by means of instruments, licenses, or otherwise.
By instructions, licenses, or otherwise.
Instructions, licenses,
tariffs?
Otherwise.
Okay.
That otherwise, if you say instructions, license, or otherwise, and we're asserting a power that's very, very similar to licensing, otherwise naturally carries that with it. But that's not our principal position. Our principal position is regulated importation means that.
Okay.
Right? And so you don't need to say it again. However, if Congress has authorized them to do it by licenses that could come with fees that are economically equivalent to tariffs, and then it says otherwise, that just reinforces the same conclusion that we get by using the phrase regulated importation.
Okay, then question just to follow up on Justice Gorsuch's thing about how can Congress ever get this delegation back. You said, well, listen, you point to the Congress's ability to terminate emergencies,
a couple of random runners are
which it's
popping
done.
up, but
if Congress ever wanted to get the tariffing power back,
you might be rotating a little bit
it
right
would
now.
have to have a veto-proof majority.
But anything not tech
regardless
is
of the emergency. So if Congress wanted to reject let's say that we adopt your interpretation of the statute. If Congress said, whoa, we don't like that. That gives the president too much authority under IEPA.
So Dow's the first one to go red. NASDAQ is 50-50 now.
The tariff power out
there
of
was
IEPA,
70
correct?
earlier. And then SPY, now you have 276 in the red. So yeah, you had 300 green earlier, like 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago.
But definitively interpreting a statute that grants presidential power makes it particularly hard to get the president to not want to veto something, which, as Justice is pointing out,
I'll
Gorsuch is pointing out, has him lose power. All right, I want to ask you a question about unusual and extraordinary threat, which we have not talked about yet. Okay. And I specifically want to talk about the reciprocal tariffs. These are imposed on, these are kind of across the board. And so is it your contention that every country needed to be tariffed because of threats to the defense and industrial base?
I want to hear it. I'll answer your question, though.
Spain, France, I could see it with some countries, but explain to me why as many countries needed to be subject to the reciprocal tariff policy as are.
Yeah, Executive Order 14257 spells out the nature of the emergency and basically says that there's this sort of lack of reciprocity, this asymmetric treatment of our trade with respect to foreign countries' trade.
Yeah, it's the same answer if he's going to refer back to the thing, but it's simple. If this gets overturned and they're like, you have to give the money back, you can't tariff them, I think there will be a small reaction as people react to it, and then they're going to go back to normal. Why? Because they're going to have a fucking loophole. Even if the court rejects their definitions and all of it and says you can't do that, Scott Bessent, the Treasury, there's other ways to go about it. That's what I'm saying. If they want to make it difficult, they can, but you can't really stop it, if that makes any sense. So yeah, this is just the easiest, most cost-efficient way to, again, money's pouring in from it. Whoa, INDV. Hi, 2% down. So yeah, I don't think it's you'll get a little knee-jerk reaction if there was a bad outcome from this, but then I don't think it's going to adjust the overall trade scenario too much, especially with Bessent and Trump being kind of, willful for it.
Kinds of basis for it. And also keep in mind that the emergency is not like just the asymmetric treatment, it's the impact of the asymmetry, the underlying conditions, the hollowing out of our manufacturing base,
and Microsoft.
Vulnerability of our supply chains.
Microsoft, that probably took away a little bit.
Our defense industrial basis, vulnerability of key inputs.
Justice Jackson?
So as I understand your response to Justice Barrett in that last question, you're saying that the power to tariff fits naturally with the power to block and seize. That was your example. But I guess I'm trying to understand then your argument from the text of the actual statute. Because the statute, unlike what you suggested to Justice Kagan, is focused on the actual actions that the president can take. In response to Justice Kagan, I understood you to say that Congress was giving the president broad authority to act, and it was within a particular domain, which is the domain of emergencies with respect to foreign power, but the president could basically do a lot of things. But when I read the statute, it is telling the president exactly what he can do: investigate, block during the pendency of an investigation, regulate, direct and compel, nullify, void, prevent, or prohibit. And I guess what is a little concerning to me is that your argument suggests that we should see the phrase imposed tariffs in that same series of things that the president could do. We don't see that word, and instead you take regulate and say that must mean that. So I guess I'm getting back to Justice Barrett's maybe original question, which was, where else in the code has Congress used the word regulate to sub in for imposed tariffs?
TWIA, and then this court's opinions, of course, have used regulate and import, or have pointed out that duties are the natural way to regulate foreign commerce.
But you're saying we should not have expected to see the same level of granularity with respect to the president's authority to impose tariffs as we see here: investigate, block, direct and compel, nullify, et cetera.
I think it would be very unusual for Congress to spell out all the ways that you can regulate in that statute.
So regulate becomes a big catch-all. The rest of the other things...
we have a concession of that from the other side, that regulate at least includes qualitative methods, quantitative methods, quotas, licenses. They've conceded that regulate, there's a lot in regulate that's not spelled out there. And our point is you don't need to spell out tariffs, because that's, like, of all of them, the most natural, the most quintessential method of regulating imports.
And yet, many presidents have not used regulate in this way to impose tariffs. I understand you point to President Nixon. We have licenses from Lincoln, but no one else.
Justice Kavanaugh, presidents who are faced with international crises to which tariffing is the natural response, that's President Nixon and President Trump, have invoked this authority. And also, frankly, President Trump invoked this authority in May of 2019 as well.
Can I ask you one question? It's more historically attested than they can see. Let me just ask one more question about the unusual threat. So in your conversation with Justice Gorsuch, that we had the climate change tariff hypo, and you indicated that there would be challengers to the notion that was an unusual and extraordinary threat.
And most people know this now. I
Wondering,
think the market,
position, would they be able to make
the
a
news
legal
will probably
challenge?
freak out and people will be like, oh my
the court
gosh.
would not be able
but I
to
think the market is well
review.
aware that
On that
there's an
particular hypothetical,
alternative.
I think I said that'd be a question for
And at
Congress.
least Scott wanted you to know that.
Yeah, I don't. In other words, that wouldn't be the sort of thing that courts would want to wade into. Is this really an emergency? That would not be probably very unlikely. That'd be a situation where at least there'd be very, very, very deferential judicial review of that kind of determination.
No, I'm asking you. Right, those are two different things. Is there no judicial review, or is there deferential review?
Our frontline, Trump against Hawaii, our frontline position is that it falls within Dalton against Specter. It's committed to the president's discretion when he makes his determination of a national emergency. But the court doesn't have to decide that because whatever review is very, very deferential. It's easily satisfied here.
Thank you.
Thank you, counsel.
Is it over? No. I think he's going to ask him another one.
Mr. Katyal?
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. Tariffs are taxes. They take dollars from Americans' pockets and deposit them in the U.S. Treasury. Our founders gave that taxing power to Congress alone. Yet here, the president bypassed Congress and imposed one of the largest tax increases in our lifetimes.
See, that's what
Many
you need, though.
doctrines
You need to
explain
view it
why
as
this
a
is
tax.
illegal.
That's
like
that's what they're
presumption
trying to
that Congress
stand on.
speaks
Peloton
clearly
and
when it
OpenAI.
imposes taxes and duties, and the major questions doctrine. But it comes down to common
AI going to tell me
sense.
to run faster?
It's simply implausible that in enacting IEEPA, Congress handed the president the power
make no
to
physical
overhaul the
change if
entire
you don't
tariff system and the American economy in the process, allowing him to set and reset tariffs on any and every product from any and every country at any and all times. And as Justices Gorsuch and Barrett just said, this is a one-way ratchet. We will never get this power back if the government wins this case. What president wouldn't veto legislation to rein this power in and pull out the tariff power? IEEPA is a sanction statute. It's not a tax statute where Congress gave away the store. Congress knows exactly how to delegate its tariff powers every time for 238 years. It's done so explicitly, always with real limits. IEEPA looks nothing like those laws. It uses regulate, which Congress has used hundreds of times, never once to include tariffs, and it lacks the limits of every other tariff statute. And that is why, even though presidents have used IEEPA to impose economic sanctions thousands of times, no president in IEEPA's 50-year lifetime has ever tried to impose tariffs. And the president bypassed statutes that do address tariffs, like Section 122 for large and serious trade deficits, but that imposes a clear guardrail, 15% cap, 150-day limit. This is Youngstown at its lowest ebb. If the government wins, another president could declare a climate emergency and impose huge tariffs without fines or without floors or ceilings, as Justice Gorsuch said. My friend's answer, this administration would declare it a hoax. The next president may not quite say that. This is an open-ended power to junk the tariff laws and is certainly not conveyed by the word regulate. I welcome the court's questions.
Wouldn't your argument also apply to embargoes?
So, and this is the argument in the fine dissent below, and I think there are three answers to that, Justice Thomas. The first is revenue raising. Embargoes stop the shipment. Tariffs start the tax bill. They are first and foremost ways of regulating revenue, as some of your own opinions said. This is the way we actually chiefly got revenue for the first 100 years of our republic. Tariffs are constitutionally special because our founders feared revenue raising, unlike embargoes. And, there was no Boston embargo party, but there was certainly a Boston Tea Party. The second thing, textually, in the statute, it's different. Regulate appears in a cluster of verbs, as was said before, investigate, block, nullify, and the like. They describe embargo-like controls, prevent and prohibit, for example. But they don't describe revenue exactions. That's Justice Kagan's point. The one verb that's missing here is anything about raising revenue whatsoever. Another point, congressional displacement. Today, there is a whole host of statutes in the tariff architecture of Title 19, which both expressly confer the power to tariff and always impose clear limits. Embargoes by the president, embargoes don't have any of that. They don't set aside that whole thing. If you look at the Learning Resources brief at page 5, it goes through these statutes in detail. Section 122 expressly says duties and then limits it, 15%, 150 days. Section 201, any duty on the imported article, but it requires ITC findings. Section 301, impose duties. That's the language of the statute, but all sorts of procedural restrictions. Section 338, the same. I can go through this, and I could start, by the way, Justice Thomas, with the statutes at the founding, all of which expressly said the word tariff or an equivalent.
Let's go back to your non-delegation point. It would seem that if it's
my UI path needs to be updated.
If the tariff power cannot be delegated, your argument on non-delegation would also have to apply to embargoes and to quotas.
No, Your Honor, because I think tariffs, because they're uniquely revenue raising, impose special, unique concerns that go back to our founding. And so I don't think that they apply to embargoes. And indeed, the history of this is very,
a couple of the
very
earnings
clear.
plays are waking up.
As you just heard my friend say, in 1790, George Washington was delegated massive embargo power from the Congress.
Remember, they said at 1 p.m. today
This is why the example cuts the other way. They never gave the president any sort of delegation of tariff authority at the time. Our point is not you can't delegate tariff authority. It's simply that you've got to do so with intelligible principles. And what you just heard my friend say is every single limit in IEPA is one that is not judicially enforceable. There's no limit whatsoever. And indeed, the main limit that was in there, he calls this some compromise position. The only compromise in 1977 was the legislative veto.
All right, new high.
And as this case comes to the court, that's no longer in the statute at all.
Counsel, yes, sure, the tariffs are a tax, and that's a core power of Congress, but they're a foreign-facing tax, right? And that foreign affairs is a core power of the executive. And I don't think you can dismiss the consequences. I mean, we didn't stay this case, and one thing is quite clear is that the foreign-facing tariffs have in several situations.
Right, and we are.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Were quite effective in achieving particular objectives. So I don't think you can just separate it when you say, well, this is a tax to Congress's power. It implicates very directly the president's foreign affairs power.
Yeah. Mr. Chief Justice, we don't disagree with a large part of that. We think instead of thinking about foreign versus domestic, the better way of thinking about it is Article 1 versus Article 2. And as my friend finally conceded to Justice Gorsuch, there is no Article 2 power here, at least when we're talking about peacetime.
Well, you don't agree with a large part. What's the little part that you do disagree?
So we agree with the idea that tariffs have foreign policy implications. Absolutely. Our founders recognize that. That's in the Federalist Papers. But nonetheless, they exclusively committed that power to the Congress in Article 1, Section 8, and gave it as its first power. So when you hear my friends cite cases like Egan and Garamendi, they just don't apply to this specific, unique situation in which Congress is given that power. And if you were tempted by this, I think the best place to look is Youngstown, because what Justice Jackson said, and I was surprised that he quoted pages 652, because what Justice Jackson said is, quote, emergency powers tend to kindle emergencies, so it's essential the public may know the extent and limitations of the powers that can be asserted, and persons affected may be informed from the statute of its rights and duties. And Justice Jackson went on to say there that it's notable our founders didn't give the president revenue-raising power even in a time of war.
Can I just get a clarification of your answer, which is you agree if the word tariff were in the statute, that would be acceptable and constitutionally permissible, correct?
No, it'd be constitutionally permissible. The question would then be, is the open-ended assertion of power here, because every other tariff
I
statute
get as
has
applied to this
limitations.
case, but the general point is, yes, Congress, you said it's assigned to Congress, but Congress can grant authority to presidents to impose tariffs.
Absolutely.
As a general proposition.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have to figure out then what regulate importation means. And you've heard my questions. If this statute came out of nowhere in 1977, I think your case would be, obviously stronger. We have to figure out, at least I want to figure out what the Nixon precedent stands for and what Algonquin stands for. On the Nixon precedent, the question is, I think, was Congress aware of that, meaning that when they used regulate importation and it's now being used to encompass tariffs, that's not unheralded because Congress was well aware. President Nixon announced those tariffs in a nationwide primetime speech, 10% across the board in August 1971. It was not some kind of little piece of paper. So it was well known. The question then is, was Congress, why didn't they change the language? Why didn't they say regulate but not tariffs? That's kind of the difficult question from the Nixon precedent that I'll give you an opportunity to answer.
Thank you, Justice Kavanaugh. So 5 answers on the Nixon precedent.
I think that's what they keep saying.
First, there is no evidence that Congress thought it was ratifying Yoshida. It was a single Court of Appeals case.
It's not somewhat my question. I never mentioned Yoshida. It's the use by the president of that power under regulated importation.
Oh, if we're just talking about that, President Nixon did not rely on the statute whatsoever. I mean, that's very clear. In fact, we have a Marshall McLuhan moment here because you have before you Alan Wolf, the person who was there in the room with Nixon, saying Nixon totally disagreed that this statute applied. So if we're just talking about Nixon, I don't think it can get the government where it
Go to your other four.
Other four. So I think the only way it does any work is if the president is through the vehicle of Yoshida, and that's what I take it the government is arguing. And with respect to that, this cert-denied intermediate court of appeals decision, I don't think it can come close to overcoming the clear, plain text.
On track for
the
its
word
longest
regulate
losing
is
streak
words
since
regulate
September
importation. The word regulate has never been
That was the last
used.
time we had this earnings
The
shit,
Congress uses the term
where they would all beat and go
1,499
down.
times. We got about that number of hits when we looked at it. And maybe there's some double counting. But it is never used even once to impose taxes or revenue raising. And that was the question that Justice Barrett was asking. And so I don't think that this intermediate court of appeals decision will get you there. And then even if you thought that Congress knew about Yoshida, and even if you thought they liked it, which there's absolutely zero evidence of, I don't think that helps the government for reasons that Justice Alito was pointing to, because Yoshida said 3 things. A, TWIA doesn't give the unlimited authority that the government is seeking here. B, they were only upholding the limited specific assertion of authority that President Nixon sought there. And third, going forward, the solution, they said in footnote 33, was to use Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act, 15%, 150 days. So we have no problem with the president doing that. It's just that this president has torn up the entire tariff architecture. For example, he's tariffing Switzerland, one of our allies, which we have a trade surplus, 39%. That is just not something that any president has ever had the power to do in our history. And the idea that Congress, by implication, did this in 1977 and handed him all this power, I think is really difficult.
Just ask the other. Go ahead.
Let's start with just the bare statutory language. You have arguments about structure, you have arguments about history. There are strong arguments, but let's just start with the bare statutory language, regulate importation. If we disregard all of the rest, would you dispute that that would include the imposition of a fee?
So if it's revenue, we do dispute that, absolutely.
What if there were a statute that said,
would you guys like
suppose that there's a particular national park that's very crowded, and Congress passes a statute that says the
better than the
National
last
Park
couple of days.
Service
It's
may
mostly led by
regulate admission to the park. Would you say,
you
well,
got a couple
that
tech
does not
names that are
allow
down.
them to
Microsoft went down.
impose a
Apple's
fee?
coming up.
So, Your Honor, sometimes we think of fees as not revenue raising, but rather capturing the cost of government services. In your example, the going to the park, that may, those kinds of cases, which I think.
Suppose it goes beyond the cost of running the park. Congress just wants to control admission to the park, regulate admission. Wouldn't that include the imposition of a fee?
So if it doesn't raise revenue, then and it's not about that, then I think that's fine. If it does,
it raises revenue. Then
I think it's
that's
tougher
the hypothetical. That wouldn't apply.
So I think in that circumstance that it wouldn't be a regulation in context. It wouldn't be permitted. That is, at least in the context of tariffs and trade, we know, Justice Alito.
Okay, well, that gets into your other arguments. We start out with the bare statutory language, and that was what my question was about. Do you think all tariffs are revenue raising? Suppose that instead of imposing these across the board tariffs, suppose that an executive order imposed a tariff on one particular country and provided that this would take effect in 90 days. And suppose that within those 90 days, an agreement is reached with that country so that no tariff is ever collected. Would that be a revenue-raising tariff?
I take it the initial point and on its face, it is revenue raising, that's what it's for. And so I think that would. And look, I don't doubt that there are edge cases. That is what this court's confronted just recently in FCC versus Consumer Research. And you said, look, what is a tax is sometimes very hard. What is revenue raising?
All these elections
this is
over
obviously
with.
revenue raising. Their own brief to the court says it's going to raise $4 trillion. And Justice Alito, you and your Consumer Research dissent, or Justice Gorsuch's dissent that you joined, said taxation is special and different. And it is the most powerful thing the government does. And the idea that Congress, when they know exactly how to write tariff and tax statutes, gave this power by implication through the word regulate, I think is very, very hard to contest.
You cite many different statutory provisions that impose tariffs. And you have a point if that's the relevant universe. What if the relevant universe is tariffs that are imposed in emergency situations?
Yes, so I think it cuts the other way. So, as Justice Jackson said, it's when you're in an emergency situation, the statutes actually have to speak with more precision. The public needs to know because emergencies beget emergencies. And I would say the best way of understanding what Congress does in emergencies is to look at their emergency statutes. Not one has ever given the president a taxation power or a tariff power. We've had all sorts of emergencies for 238 years. No president has ever said, oh, the way to deal with that is I need to have a tariff authority. And as Justice Sotomayor said, IEPA gives already a quota power, so you can get what the foreign policy piece of it is through that. I'd also say, Justice Alito, Dames and Moore, which the Chief Justice referred to earlier, I think is really important here because the Solicitor General in that case made a similar argument to what you just heard on the claims provisions. He said it falls within regulate. Regulate is a capacious term. He said, Justice Alito, what you said, this is an emergency situation. And he said you've got to defer to the president on a major issue of national security about this very statute. And what did the court do? It rejected those arguments and said IEPA doesn't cover this.
You say that this is not, this case does not, these executive orders do not address an unusual and extraordinary threat. I understand that argument. Suppose that the facts were that it was suppose that there was an imminent threat of war, not a declared war, but an imminent threat of war with a very powerful enemy whose economy was heavily dependent on U.S. trade. Could a president under this provision impose a tariff as a way of trying to stave off that war? Or would you say no, the president lacks that power?
Couldn't do tariff, but could do quota, embargo, all of those things.
Could do all those things, but the president could not impose a tariff. That's the one thing he couldn't do.
There's a category shift between a tariff and the other 8 powers in IEPA because it is revenue raising. So it's not a difference in degree or something like that.
So you could do all the aggressive stuff, but you can't do the one thing that would be.
The purpose of this had nothing whatsoever to do with raising 1 penny. The president didn't want to raise 1 penny. The president wanted to deter aggression that would bring the United States into a war. You would say, no, can't do that.
Yeah, Justice Alito, I think you've said many times the purpose isn't what you look at. You look to actually what the government is doing. And if you disagree disagree, if you think we're, if you think, or excuse me, if you
Delta
vote for us and the president says, I need this power, he can go across the street to Congress tomorrow and get it by a simple majority through reconciliation. But if you vote for them, this power, as Justice Gorsuch said, as Justice Barrett said, is going to be stuck with us forever. The power to jump.
Can I ask you?
I just wanted to give you a chance to address kind of the other argument that's been submerged here textually. Again, just bare text for a moment, okay? We've been focused on regulate importation, but actually the statute says the president may, by means of licenses or otherwise, regulate importation. And we've had some discussion today about the fact that maybe the president could simply recharacterize these tariffs as licenses or rejigger the scheme so that they are licenses. We've also heard the suggestion that otherwise, licenses and tariffs are very similar, so otherwise might encompass tariffs there. Thoughts?
Yeah,
we got past zero close. Give it another 5 minutes. Let things settle.
The SG is not even making that argument, and I think they're not making it for a number of reasons. One is that there's a strong presumption against reading statutes this way in the unique tax and duties context. Hartranft is one of those cases which says if there's doubt, you don't read the statute to confer such powers.
It's still not like, again, even in an odd way, the way it's moving, you've still got a lot of lag on the premium, but again, it's a lot better than the last couple days.
World, and
seems like you're putting a major questions thumb or an interpretive lens thumb on the plain text there. Is that fair?
I think you could call it major questions. I just think it's like Justice Barrett said in Nebraska versus Biden, the most natural way of understanding what the statute is about. We're talking about, under the government's reading, a statute that gives the power to the president to junk the entire tariff.
I understand that, but you're not disputing licenses or otherwise means what it says. You're saying that we should interpret that narrowly for particular reasons.
Nike.
So I think, I am disputing it as well. I think the licenses is something Justice Sotomayor was saying. Don't expand the power. They are not verbs.
Maps in
and
Gemini.
So it is limited to the 9 verbs there.
No, I understand that.
And so regulate, I don't think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, counsel. Justice Thomas, anything further?
I'd like to just revisit the point that Justice Alito was making with a similar question. If one of our major trading partners, that's, for example, China, held a U.S. citizen
all the tariff
hostage,
stocks. This happened last time.
Could
really,
the president,
the real play is going to be
short
K-Web
of embargoing or setting quotas, say the most effective way to gain leverage is to impose a tariff
even Lulu,
for the purpose of leveraging his position to recover our hostage?
No, Your Honor. So tariffs are different because they're revenue raising, and I think it goes to the point I was saying to you in our very first colloquy, which is quotas, embargoes, and stuff are different for a different reason, which is there's a tariff architecture around Title 19, in Title 19, that in tariff would, like in your hypothetical, would supersede. And here the president is seeking the power to set aside all of our trade treaties unilaterally under the word regulate. I just don't think it can bear that weight.
Justice Alito?
You mentioned other tariff provisions that you think would be rendered redundant if we adopted the government's interpretation of IEPA. One that you didn't mention, which is discussed in an amicus brief, is Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930. Why doesn't the plain language of that provision, which does speak specifically about duties, provide a basis for all or virtually all of the tariffs that are at issue here?
Yeah, the government's never made that argument, Justice Alito, and I think for very good reason, because it only applies to MFN violations, which are not at issue here. You can only tariff if the president, quote, finds as a fact that a country satisfies 2 conditions, including that it discriminates against the United States. There are also a host of other reasons why Section 338 may have lapsed, and that's why no president has ever used it. But look,
what is the argument that it's lapsed? It's regrettable. I mean, we put this case on a very expedited schedule, and therefore there are limitations on what and the parties' ability to answer each other's arguments or arguments that are made by amici. The amicus brief says that it hasn't lapsed. There are articles that say it hasn't lapsed. What is your argument? What is the basis for your argument that it lapsed?
So two things, Justice Alito. Sections 252 and 301 have been understood by many to have superseded Section 338. And second, I don't think you have to get into this issue at all. We're not here saying that the government doesn't have a 338 power. That's something that can be decided by other courts at other times. As these folks come to the court, as the government comes to the court today, they're citing one statute and one statute only, IEPA, and we submit to you it doesn't come even close to authorizing these worldwide tariffs.
Well, what if the president tomorrow were to say, I'm reissuing these executive orders and I'm invoking, in addition to other authorities, Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930?
I think at that point we'd have that case. I mean, I'm not here to say that 338 does or doesn't do one thing. I'm responding to the government's argument, which is the invocation of IEPA and IEPA alone. But perhaps that point, Justice Alito, may give the court some comfort.
I mean, I understand party presentation and all of that, and not being a court of first view. But in these circumstances, if that were to happen, and it might be a realistic possibility, you think, well, okay, then the government would continue to try to collect these tariffs, and the plaintiffs here would have to go back to the Court of International Trade or the district court and challenge it again, and it would have to progress through those lower courts and come back to us when? A year from now? 6 months from now? While the tariffs continue to be collected and the amount that's at stake mounts into the billions. I mean, what are we at now? 100 billion? We get up to $1 trillion? That's what you're suggesting?
So, Justice Alito, I think a few things. One is I think it's rich for the government to be making this argument about the refunds undermining us because they oppose the preliminary injunction in this case by saying, oh, don't worry, we'll give the refunds later. And they sought a stay in the Federal Circuit on exactly that ground, which was you don't need to implement the Federal Circuit's
if that is a possible justification for these tariffs, for us to address that now and get it over with rather than having this continue for who knows how long while it goes through the procedures in the lower courts.
Justice Alito, I think that is forfeited 9 ways to Sunday. This amicus brief has been filed in every single stage of this case. The government's never embraced that argument. For them to be able to do so now, I think is way, way too late. But I do think if you ruled, as we're suggesting you do, against the government, they can go and try and seek to use other authorities, whether it's 338, Section 122, etc. Those are the ways prescribed by the Congress. And as Justice Kavanaugh was saying earlier, every other president has used all this suite of other authorities, 201 for steel, for autos and things like that, 301 for countries like China. This president has come along and said something different, and with all due respect, we don't think IEPA allows him to do this junking of the worldwide tariff architecture.
And what was the view, what were the views of President Trump's immediate predecessors?
I like it. I'm not going to lie, bro. I think it sucks that all of these, regional judges and shit have
There's
given
been a variety of different views about that,
by defending
the
some
executive
bullshit.
order,
But
my friend
I
said,
really think this is a good case.
Prior presidents
I
had no
actually enjoy hearing
occasion
this,
to
and
use
I actually have a
the
little bit
tariff
more
power,
faith in
which
the
is
Supreme
belied
Court.
by the very executive order
I like
he's
the
defending
challenging.
here,
I like
which
the back
says
and forth.
that the trade deficit's been
I
large
don't
and
agree with some of
persistent every
the
single
definitions,
quarter
but
since
I definitely
1976.
see the
We've
point
had
that they're
trade
trying
wars.
to make.
President Reagan
Even though I may not trust some of them,
different ones in the
but
use of
it
different
is. I think
authorities,
this is
but
great.
never
Honestly,
once
I
did
do
a
think this is
president try
big.
and seek
And I was just telling the
IEPA
other
as
guys,
the
man,
basis to rewrite the
there's a
entire
play out
tariff
there.
code.
Whether I want you to think, I'm not going to.
I found it interesting to hear
I didn't
you
give him the
make
exact play.
Non-delegation
but you have to
argument,
think any way you cut this.
I wonder if you ever thought
there's an opportunity
that
at hand.
Legacy as a constitutional
listen and
advocate
think, whether
would
this
be
goes through or not, I've answered
the
it many
man
times
who
in
revived
terms of
the non-delegation argument.
The workaround.
Yes, Justice
but
Alito.
think about it.
I think Justice Gorsuch
whether this
nailed
goes
it on
good
the
or
head
bad,
when
what would
saying
happen?
that when you're
find that
dealing with
consequence,
a
you have a play.
statute that is this open-ended, unlike anything we've ever seen, to give the president this kind of power. Yes, this isn't just delegation running riot. This is delegation that's a legislative effort.
Wouldn't you agree
they're bringing up very good points on both
statutes
sides.
that confer on
And that's
the
what I'm saying. It
president
just sucks
real
that some of these other
emergency
judges,
powers are often
you know, I
phrased
think a lot of
much
us
more
have been like, what the
broadly
fuck you mean a judge
than
stopping
other
this?
statutes.
And like a lot of it was bullshit.
Isn't it the
but,
very nature of an
you know,
emergency? I
the
know you
highest court
dispute
of the
the fact
land,
that
I
this
still
is a
think
real
there's
emergency.
a
Maybe
little bit
it's
of
not.
faith in there.
But isn't it the very nature of an emergency provision
very
that
educational
is
for
going to
everybody if
be
you actually
more
care.
open-ended?
If you actually care
Justice
about
Alito,
how this
we
is
think
all
it actually cuts the
materializing.
other way, as I was saying earlier. That's what Justice Jackson
Wouldn't
said.
the yields
and,
drop? It could, but
he
I
already
mean,
confronted
I
that
think
in Jameson
you might
Moore
already
and
be
said it's not
front-running
that open-ended, even
mixed
though
in
it's
with
an
some other
emergency.
stuff, but
And by the
I wouldn't
way,
get caught up in the
other
yields. I would
emergency
get caught up
statutes
in
have very serious
kinda end
limits.
of the
Section
year Santa Rally
122
and what
is
other
literally
plays
about
that leads
President
to.
Nixon's proclamation
That's at least
of
my
an
take.
emergency.
I don't think you
That's
could
what
be
it's
right,
about,
but then,
and it's limited
I mean, bonds are
15%
already down
150
1%.
days.
I mean, what about the
workaround.
authorization for the use
You
of
see,
military
I'm looking
force
for the
in
win-win.
2001, which
That's
gave
what I'm
the
saying. I really
president
think there's a win-win in
power
this
to
one, no
use
matter if it
all
goes through, if
appropriate
it doesn't,
force.
whether we rip,
And
whether we
that's
die
pretty
here. I think
open-ended.
there's a
Would
couple
you
win-win
apply the
plays out there.
same,
Yeah, all of the Qualcomm earning plays came back.
non-delegation argument there that you do here?
Of course not, because there you have shared powers between the president in Article 1 and Article 2 powers. That's what I was saying.
Well, it gets
Chief
into the
Justice.
question of whether it was delegated or not. What was the scope of the delegation?
Absolutely, but there, it's military. There's a whole unique history behind that. But here you're talking about something that is exclusively committed to Congress in Article 1. And there, yes, when you
All
have
right, the
delegations,
Nike, yeah, 100% on
even
them.
when you have
I made it
delegations
free.
in some
I
military
put that shit on the
cases,
bid.
in
Now it's at
emergency
150.
statutes, they have
You
all
just jumped
sorts of
to ask.
limits. So 10 U.S.C.
And then
2808
Qualcomm,
says that
dude, they
in a
swagged the
declaration
Qualcomm,
of
so those
war
came back.
or a national emergency, the
Now,
president
I
can,
think
quote,
that it's
undertake
getting
military
active again,
construction
but you need this to
necessary
hold
to
this
support
little
emergency
window,
use of the
bro.
armed
Thank you
forces.
very much.
You
but it
just
has
got
limits.
like premiums move there. It's kind of fun. But we need more continuation. But again, I think people are front running government shutdown and as well as front running the thing that we have at 1 p.m. And then, like I'm telling you, I think there's two flip sides of how this case could come out.
That Congress found it
some winners and
necessary
losers.
to ratify their actions, and that the court in both those cases, the Intermediate Court of Appeals in Nixon and our own court, included that as part of their reasoning, as justifying the use of war power in that situation. So I'm a little concerned why the fact that this act, the domestic
I'm glad I
act
gave
on
you guys the
emergency
alert. I said it's
that
not the
uses
perfect
a word,
one.
a general
but I'm
word
really
like
glad that one
regulate,
actually went.
should take
But that one
on
was tough
a
because
war
the spread,
powers
but you
meaning.
got it.
When in every other situation, whenever Congress intended domestic taxation, it said tax and regulate.
Oh, Justice Sotomayor, I wish I had an hour to talk about this with you, because this argument by the government advanced in their reply brief is wrong, every which way.
I'm saying that's your sixth way of differentiating Yoshida, correct?
So
that was a war powers case.
So it's a war powers case. It's about conquered territory. It has nothing to do whatsoever with domestic tariffs. And absolutely, you're right in saying that the way that court, even in those cases, even at the height of the government's power, war powers, they said Congress had to ratify it. And that's what at page 96.
And that hasn't happened here.
And that has not happened here, not even close.
Well, it might not with Congress closed, but they can't even think about it right now. I'm going to assume, and maybe he can shake his head yes or no, that Justice
all the little tariff
Kavanaugh
stocks
will
started going
ask
up.
you to
That's all. There wasn't any
go
news.
to
Nike had a bad
Algonquin,
streak,
which
but
you
then
didn't
ONON
answer, and he's
and a
shaking his
couple
head.
of others.
So I'll let him do
people
that
are
part.
feeling
Okay?
good. Like I'm telling you, I've given you the
Algonquin,
updates here,
Your
but
Honor, is that,
now they
I'll let him do
repumped
it.
some of the headlines there, and then Trump even repumped the announcement.
This is his question,
and
but I
now the
wanna make sure
odds
you
of
get
even
to
like
it.
the
We'll
government
hear from
shutdown,
Justice
that's starting to
Kagan
change.
first.
People are front running there.
I
And
have
then I was
one
telling you here,
specific
bro,
question,
overnight
one more
funding
general
rates
question.
dropped.
The specific
So
question
that
is,
little liquidity problem.
does it matter in the way we think about
that
IEEPA,
was my
what
best
Congress thought
sign
it was
today.
doing in IEEPA,
You know, it was already
what
feeling
IEEPA
different,
in
and we
fact
were
did.
talking pump fake this
That
morning
at the
and
time,
last night.
Congress thought
So
it
I was
had
gonna say, like,
available
you know,
to
they
it
got
a
one in the chamber,
legislative
bro.
veto.
But yeah, that
I do think
overnight
it's
funding
relevant,
rate, the
at
dollar,
least
that
for
would have gotten
delegation
away,
purposes,
and now it's
because,
not.
as this
I'm
case
actually very
comes to the
surprised by
court,
that.
The one check that was in there, the so-called compromise, is a legislative veto which now no longer exists.
Here's
and that's
the
why I said to
SOFR,
Justice
the overnight
Alito,
funding
this
rates.
statute now looks unlike
This is what
any
I'm
other
saying.
statute.
We were tripping, and
with
this is why I
respect
think
to-
I guess
Michael
I'm
Burry
wondering
was
whether,
doing
though,
shit.
it cuts
And,
against
you know,
you
this
as
is
well,
the thing
that
with,
Congress
like,
thought it had
the
a
banks.
legislative veto,
But yeah,
so
you
it
actually
didn't
you hit a
put
new
in
low now.
a
So
variety
that
of
means
checks that
pressure,
it might have put
some
in
sort of funding pressure
had it not
eased in
thought
the
it
last
had a
24
legislative
hours.
veto, and that's just tough luck on Congress now.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, Justice Kagan, I think it's a very tough common sense
BHP.
argument to make because every single delegation of tariff power statute from Congress to the president always has limits, and including, Section 122 passed just right before IEPA had in the case of the exact problem that this executive order is dealing with, large and serious trade deficits. It said the way to deal with it is 15%, 150 days. The idea that 3 years later they just said, oh no, junk the rule book, I think is very difficult. And no Congress, I think, would rely just on the legislative veto for such a thing as such tremendous importance.
But dude,
as you
look,
said
you
to
didn't
my
even make
colleague
shit.
earlier,
Like,
why
you're
would
up on
any
it, but like, come
president
on.
look to all of the different tariff
Bullshit.
statutes in Title 19?
They're up.
If you can
All of them
just
are up
IEPA
now after
them
getting
all,
slashed.
French
You could have double
Revolution them
dipped,
all.
but that's bullshit.
General
for that type of
Sauer
move.
rests a lot on
And
the
then
president's
Delta
inherent
Airlines are on the high
authority.
now.
And I want to make sure I understand your answer to the Chief Justice and to Justice Alito as to where you
Microsoft was the
think
one that
that
went down.
authority exists in a way that actually would
Ethereum's on the
affect
high.
our interpretation of a statute, and where you
Meta's
think
all
it
day, but
doesn't,
the Meta
and
premium
why
stopped
this
after that. I
falls
remember they
into
were
the
just
second
kindly
category.
moving.
Given
And
that,
Eli Lilly.
in General Sauer's view, this is obviously what the Chief Justice called foreign-facing.
Yeah, so it may be foreign-facing, but there is still no Article 2 power whatsoever. There is no citation whatsoever in the government's brief to any notion that the president has Article 2 tariff authority. Now, look, I will say in wartime, conquered territory, maybe, but this is not a wartime or conquered territory statute. This is or a use of the statute. They are tariffing the entire world in peacetime, and they are doing it and asserting a power that no president in our history has ever had. Even Justice Kavanaugh's example of Nixon, really far more limited, didn't blow past Congress's limits, as was said in Yoshida.
That one looks a little
this
unique.
is a whole different animal.
No trigger
and
yet,
maybe
though.
Congress has that power, as I agree with Justice Gorsuch.
Again, I think you're going to get an alcohol buyout
they gotta
at
say
some
so
point in the
really
next like
clearly.
6 months.
And here, there's nothing like that in the text
FedEx
of
is going.
IEPA.
Thank you.
Justice Gorsuch?
Limited
I don't know if
edition
I agree with
Modelo.
what you say, I say,
You guys
but
know
at
that?
any rate.
Noche Especial. Holiday beer
back to
celebrating the
plain
spirit
language,
of Noche Buena.
And just stick with me for a moment. The Constitution says that Congress gets to regulate commerce. And everybody understood that that meant and included the power to tariff. Story, Madison, okay? So that's
House
sort of
one
a
Delta
problem,
CEO to answer
right?
questions
Regulate
on
is a
AI ticket
capacious
pricing.
verb. And then you've got the otherwise language.
No, bro, I
as
got
well,
pissed
which
off.
we've sort of
Last time I
discussed.
tried to book a flight, bro,
And just on
I
the
was
plain
booking
language, forget
and
about
then
the backdrop.
even with the hotel too.
Do you need
and I
major
go to book
questions
it,
to win?
and I'm like,
I kinda-
oh,
I
let me
kinda think you might.
let me
No,
just
I don't
double
think
check,
so.
and
I
I
mean, if
back
we did,
out.
I think we'd win
and
for
I go to
reasons
book it, and they
expressed, but I
fucking
don't think so
triple the
at all.
price,
So,
dude. I got
Justice
so
Gorsuch, our
pissed.
position is
I'm like,
not
why did you do
that
this?
regulate can never
I know
mean
you
tax or
listened to me.
tariff.
Okay.
Our brief
Here's
at page
Meta.
15
So
gives
if
you
you
an
think
example.
everything's
A
gonna rip,
president may
I do
regulate
agree that
cars coming
Microsoft's
in
your lagger,
to the
but if
city,
Microsoft
and then
stays
if it
gutted, you're
adds by
fucked.
charging tolls or something like
Or
that,
even
absolutely,
Amazon,
in
keep that in
context
mind.
it does.
Or even Netflix.
Here, the
Netflix
context
is
you're
still moving
referring
up,
to,
but you got a little bit more of
Story
that
and
front
so
run.
on, says nothing about this case. That is the constitutional
Valentine.
context about
back.
Congress's use of power.
But it's part of how we understand language is used,
Say
and
10% is
it's
hold it.
relevant for that purpose. And then when you've got licenses, which are economically the same thing as, would you agree they're basically economically the same thing as tariffs?
Sometimes they can be revenue
Okay, so you've got
raising.
something that's economically identical to a tariff authorized by this statute.
So-
Where does that leave you?
So let me
As a matter of plain
let me take
language.
the question in two parts. One is about the word regulate, and the other is about licensing. With respect to the
informed
word
Russia on
regulate,
Minuteman
when it's
missile
used in the
launch.
constitutional sense, it's very different than the sense in
back.
IEPA that my friend is asserting. When we're asserting IEPA, we're talking about a statute that is granting the president massive powers. And so the relevant context that I think you look at in asking the question, what did Congress mean in 1977? The best context, the most natural context is, what does Congress say every time they grant the president such power? And then there's just one other point on this. Constitutions are read totally differently. Story and Madison are talking about the constitutional phrase, and as Chief Justice Marshall said in McCulloch, a constitution we're expounding, the prolixity of a legal code is the opposite of the way you read the Constitution.
I do follow that argument. Okay.
And
what about otherwise? Again, I just really want to make sure I understand. You say that there's a good reason why the Solicitor General didn't make that argument. I'll be curious to see what he has to say about that. But what's your best reasoning why the otherwise language doesn't?
Because it's only a mechanism to implement the 9 powers, and that licenses sometimes can be revenue raising and sometimes not.
Yeah.
And so
if licenses can be revenue raising, and you can do this otherwise through revenue raising things, why wouldn't that capture tariffs?
So because I think, again, our point to you is that that there's two kinds of licenses come in 2 flavors. If an executive order is asserting a license fee to recoup the cost of government services or something like that, as I was saying to Justice Alito, that doesn't look different than the other verbs. That's not revenue raising. It doesn't implicate the founder's concern. It doesn't implicate the concerns you wrote about in consumers' research about the fear of the government.
Well, you're not answering my question, though, Mr. Kacha. I'm talking about just the plain text here. And you're moving to major questions or a non-delegate. That's the move you're making, which I think, fine, we can consider that. I'm just talking about on the text, okay? It says by means of licenses or otherwise. You've conceded that licenses are economically equivalent to tariffs. And the statute says by means of licenses.
No. The best way to put it,
right.
Unless it's a good environment, I'll start using it.
We looked at the
it's a means.
You're really high up, dude, if you want to take the holding risk. That's all you.
Because, again, it has to be related to the 9 powers that
a license can be. We have to acknowledge that. And you've said a license can raise revenue. And you've said a license is equivalent to a tariff economically.
I don't know if it's with everything else. High ticker's very active, but you're kind of stalling. There's meta now.
If the license or the otherwise is raising revenue, then it is a difference in kind from the other verbs. And we looked at the history of licenses under TWIA, and we were not able to find any involving licenses or license fees.
Okay. Last question, a little further afield. The parties discussed a little bit the analogy to the Foreign Commerce Clause. Of course, next to it is the Indian Commerce Clause. And delegations there were very broad initially and involved licenses once again. And why shouldn't that inform our understanding of the Foreign Commerce Clause?
I don't know that I have a position on that.
Interesting. Target's moving like one of these fucking tariff plays.
Well, if the president has broad
and then don't they have earnings coming up?
Part of the Commerce Clause, why wouldn't he in the next door neighbor?
Oh, I see. Because Congress has specifically been given
we did the front run ahead. I got rid of them
over tariffs, and so if they're to part with it,
that's moving like you got some tariff shit.
I think as this court has said in J.W. Hampton, which is a tariffs case.
You'd say the same principle would apply with tariffs with the Indian Commerce Clause. Is a tariff-specific argument?
I think it's at least intelligible principles is what this court has used for tariffs specifically, and we think that's the way you should look at this. And then under intelligible principles, this is miles away from any delegation we have ever seen.
Thank you.
You're on the high. Now, biotechs are really going crazy right now.
Just on the Nixon point,
a lot of things, man. Look at the high ticker.
That the current tariffs are unprecedented. I mean, that was a 10% worldwide
maybe, right? This
tax on every import
into
the United States, I believe. I mean, we don't need, I just think that's a fact. You have arguments about that. You made good arguments about that, but just wanted that point to be clear. On Algonquin, to pick up on Justice Sotomayor's kind assist, your argument here is that the statute has to use the word tariffs, I think, basically. And we went through Nixon and Yoshida, but then Algonquin, the statute for 232, does not use the word tariffs. It uses adjust imports. And President Ford had imposed, again, a pretty significant tariff on oil imports. It was challenged. It got to this court. The attorney standing where you are stood up and said the license fee now before the court involves the broadest exercise of the tariff power in the history of the American Republic. In fact, we would have to go back to George III's stamp tax to determine as broad an executive power as claimed in this case. The statute is a simple one. It does not mention the tariff on its face. The argument there was the word tariff was not mentioned, used to just imports.
Netflix getting a little aggressive now.
Obviously,
I don't know. We just saw Fox moving. That might be tied to like the WBD deal, or otherwise, like I was telling you, that's
the
one
court
of those
does a lot of questioning. What's the difference between a quota?
But again, right when we're getting these momentum zones, it's slowing down for like 10 minutes. That's what's killing
tariff. And so,
like I say, it's still sketchy.
When the court writes the
better
opinion,
premiums, better
it says we find no support in the language of the statute. The language for respondents' contention that the authorization of the president to adjust imports should be read to encompass only quantitative methods, i.e. quotas, as opposed to monetary methods, i.e. license fees, of effecting such adjustments. So, on your basic point that you need the word tariff, Algonquin says you don't need the word tariff. And that was President Ford's oil imports. It's 9-0. The oral argument goes through this. Your answer.
There's a lot there, Justice Kavanaugh, so please bear with me. First, I'd like to clarify what our position is generally and then deal with Algonquin. Our position is not that you have to use the word tariff or any other magic word. It's true that Congress has used a specialized vocabulary since the founding, since 1790, using words like tariffs or duties. But as I was saying earlier to Justice Gorsuch, you could even use the word regulate, as our page 15 of our brief says. You can even imagine something that says, quote, the president may regulate importation by requiring importers to pay 10% of the value of goods to the Treasury. So I don't think you have to use any particular word.
Bond volatility goes up, then we have a different conversation.
Algonquin didn't have anything like that, but keep going.
So Algonquin does have, I think, a context that's miles apart from what the government is seeking here to do with IEPA. So first of all, it is a common sense statute. I understand there's some rhetoric by common sense reading of the statute. I know there's some rhetoric by the lawyer who stood here before, which is
this
of
related
course,
to the
but it was a statute about one product. 232 is article by article. It's one product. This is a billion products or even more that the government is seeking. The Algonquin was expressly a trade statute. It was the 1962 Trade Act. It's everything this case isn't. Algonquin had a specific reference to the word duties in a separate provision. Algonquin had a legislative history that was clear as day that the president was given this power. And I understand this court today doesn't look to the legislative history, but the way Algonquin got to where it was by saying the legislative history, the chief sponsor of the act.
I think I'll disagree with you on that. It does a plain text and then says, is there anything in the legislative history to defeat the plain text? So I disagree pretty strongly with you on that, but it doesn't defeat your point. Keep going.
Okay, so I'd also say, maybe the most important point, 232, our argument is not just that you have to specifically authorize a tariff with some sort of word, but also that one way of understanding whether Congress is delegating its awesome tariff power, its awesome taxing powers, to ask, are there limits to what Congress has put in? And in Algonquin, in Section 232, the court points to and goes painstakingly through all the limits. The first words of the decision are all about how constrained the statute is. It's a reticulated scheme. The cabinet secretaries have to make certain findings. There are specific statutory factors Congress says the president must look at before acting. There are public hearings. There are limited remedies, quote, to the extent necessary. All of that is in the statute. All of that is in the Algonquin opinion. None of it is in IEPA. That's the problem. And that's why, just like James and Moore, the Algonquin case said this is a very limited decision, limited just to the facts.
Thank you.
Justice Barrett?
So this license thing is important to me. And do you agree that pursuant to IEPA, the president could regulate commerce by imposing a license fee?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Could the president regulate commerce under IEPA by using a licensing fee?
Not a fee. So I should have said this earlier, but license is different from a licensing fee. IEPA and TWIA authorize licenses, not license fees.
That could be,
and
again,
no president has ever charged, to my knowledge, fees under those two statutes for the licenses.
Again, you should already be aware of that.
So fees impermissible, licenses okay.
Fees permissible if they cover the cost of
biotech too. You got ISRG.
Might be.
Remember that was a big earnings one.
But once they start revenue raising, you implicate the most serious concerns.
But I thought you conceded to Justice Gorsuch there was no difference between a tariff and a licensing fee, functionally.
If the licensing fee is just to I didn't concede that. So if the licensing fee is just to recoup the cost of government services, I think that may be okay. I don't think you need to get into it. Here, the government is asserting a power which they say in their briefs to you raises $4 trillion.
So you understand the statute to permit licensing in the sense of permission. Like, we will not allow you to trade with us. We will not allow your goods to be imported unless we license it.
Absolutely. And Justice Barrett, I think like just the natural reading, if you're to look at the word licenses and think, wow, Congress smuggled this incredible power to do all of these different things that the government is doing here, 39% taxes on some countries and others, through the word license, that's
Can you license exportation?
I don't think so, for the reason that,
Well, right now, I actually looked into this. I mean, I think you, maybe not licensing fees.
Exactly.
But could you license exportation, like saying we're not going to allow certain products that have national security implications to be exported?
Yes.
So licensing could be used in that sense,
Correct.
not as a revenue raising regime.
Yes.
Okay. So you went back and forth with Justice Gorsuch about the implications of the president's authority over foreign affairs and whether the major questions doctrine applies. You say that in IEPA, the president's war powers are not implicated, and that was part of the reason why you say that we should think of this differently than some of the historical examples where the commander-in-chief power, war powers, were implicated. But the same language appears in the Trading with the Enemies Act, in which war powers would be implicated. So do you think the language should be, and of course that is what President Nixon relied on, so do you think that the language would be interpreted differently in that context, even though the commander-in-chief power and the war power would be implicated?
100%, I think it would be interpreted differently. Justice Jackson.
Same regulate commerce language.
Yes, because once you're carrying over wartime precedents to peacetime.
Okay, I don't understand that then, because everybody agrees the language came in IEPA came from the Trading with the Enemy Act. So you're saying it has one meaning in the Trading with the Enemy Act and a different meaning in IEPA. That same regulate commerce.
No, I think that the conquered territory language and all of that may go to the president's Article 2 powers as inherent powers in conquered territory, but I don't think it gets
so notice, look at how they're talking the tariffs and look at
the CAC brief and
so
the
even
brief
if they're
by
saying,
Professor
even if
Paul
Trump's like, I
Stephen
have other
goes
options,
through and explains why in 1933, when Congress decided to bring these concepts into peacetime, it severed the wartime roots, and there's an extensive legislative history.
Okay, I understand that, but I thought that was about, maybe I'm just not tracking. I mean, I think there's been some discussion of whether the president would have inherent Article 2 authority in wartime to impose tariffs to this end. Is that what you're talking about? Are you actually talking about a statute that said regulate importation in wartime, right, and you think it could have
that might
tariff power conferred through that language in a war-making statute, but not in IEPA?
No, I don't think it confers it in either place. I think the president, the president's power in conquered territory is not in the Trading with Enemies Act or anything like that.
Okay, so it's inherent constitutional power coming from the law of war. Okay, and then if you win, tell me how the reimbursement process would work. Would it be a complete mess? I mean, you're saying before the government promised reimbursement, and now you're saying, well, that's rich, but how would this work? It seems to me like it could be a mess.
So the first thing I'd say is that just underscores just how major a question this is. The very fact that you were dealing with this with quotas, there's no refund process to the tunes of billions of dollars or embargoes, but there is here. But for our case, the way it would work is, in this case, the government stipulated for the 5 plaintiffs that they would get the refunds. So for us, that's how it would work. Your question, I take it, is about everyone else, where you don't have a class action or anything like that. With respect to everyone else, there's a a whole specialized body of trade law, and it's in 19 U.S.C. 1514 outlines all these administrative procedures. It's a very complicated thing. There's got to be an administrative protest. There was a harbor management case earlier that this court was involved with in the United States Shoe, in which, the refund process took a long time. There were any number of claims and equitable relief.
So a mess.
So it's difficult, okay. Absolutely. We don't deny that it's difficult, but I think what this court has said in the McKesson case in 1990 is that serious economic dislocation isn't a reason to do something. Northern Pipeline, you guys stayed your decision for a while in order to let the congressional process unfold. There may be a congressional process here as well. You may be able to also be that this court could limit its decision to prospective relief under the John Q. Hammonds case. So there's lots of possibilities.
Justice Jackson?
So I think I read Algonquin differently than Justice Kavanaugh. When I look at its analysis, it absolutely does a textual review, but then it says, quote, turning from Section 232's language to its legislative history, again, there is much to suggest that the president's authority extends to the imposition of monetary exactions. And I appreciate that perhaps that factor is no longer in vogue, but did you look into the legislative history here to determine whether there is anything that supports the conclusion that Congress actually intended for this IEPA statute to allow or authorize the president to impose these tariffs?
I did, and if I blinked, I would miss it because it was virtually nothing. And in fact, both page 2 of both the House and Senate report outline all of the powers that are given under IEPA, and none of them have tariff. There's one brief mention of tariff in the legislative history, but nothing else. And by the way, IEPA passed by voice vote. It was, there was not controversial. We don't deny IEPA as a big, major statute, but the question is, did it authorize tariffs? One of the most contested things since our founding.
And you say there's nothing in the legislative history to suggest it. Now, to the extent that Congress did authorize the president to do something, that those verbs are there, that the Congress was giving the president some authority, do you see a theme connecting those verbs? What was Congress trying to do? And let me just say that I see in the Senate report, which I mentioned earlier, that Congress says that it was trying to give the president the authority to, quote, control or freeze property transactions where a foreign interest is involved. And that seems to dovetail with the verbs that are being used in the statute, but what's your view of what Congress was trying to do with this legislation?
That's exactly right. They're responding to all sorts of foreign policy emergencies and foreign threats, and they're giving the president economic sanctions power.
Bro,
so what does the word regulate
been maxed out barely like 3/4 for the last
under that framework? If we understand that Congress was trying to give this kind of embargo authority in the time of an emergency, when it says regulate importation, what was it envisioning?
It was envisioning all the things that the president since 1977,
you are broadening out. Again, it's looking a lot different from the last couple days, like we said.
So they've used it for quotas, like limitations on the number of goods.
People are thinking what's going to happen in this case, thinking the end of the shutdown,
like Executive Order 12284 about reporting property of the Shaw. And they've used it for standards like domestic safety standards, environmental standards, labor requirements. They've used it for embargoes. So all of those are things that I think Congress had in mind in IEPA. And I think the proof of this, that it's not this massive statute that allows the government to do anything, is Dames and Moore itself, because this court rejected the idea that regulate includes the claims extinguishment that was at issue in that case. It's a much more limited statute. And Justice Jackson, there was a predecessor, Justice Jackson, who said, that, quote, for all its defects, delays, and inconveniences, men have discovered no technique for long preserving free government except that the executive be under the law and that the law be made by parliamentary deliberations. Such institutions may be destined to pass away, but it is the duty of this court to be last, not first, to give it up. And I take it my friend's argument on the other side is in deep tension with Youngstown and that canonical principle.
Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Mr. Mr. Gutman.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the Court, I'd like to begin by picking up with the exchanges with Justice Barrett and Justice Gorsuch about licenses and license fees, because I think we ended on the right note, but I just wanted to make sure that at least my client's position is clear on this. Licenses are different from license fees. And I am not aware of any history in the 5 decades that IEPA has been in force of any fees charged for the licenses under this statute. This is a statute that licenses can be used, for example, the president might ban certain transactions with a foreign country, but then grant licenses to do them for humanitarian reasons. But as far as I'm aware, there's never been a fee charged for that.
You guys are just talking SWK.
I do welcome
so
the
notice, there's like a lot of anything related even to like government shutdown and, think Walmart, Target, SNAP benefits,
Well,
those are moving up,
could
and then
be
a lot like
things like instructions or
like
licenses,
Nike,
but
ON,
again,
it's
fundamentally
they're just starting to like
having something that is a revenue-raising measure or even that is just an exaction of some sort is fundamentally categorically different from what we understand instructions and licenses to be involved. Just like
travel and airlines too.
We think regulate doesn't carry the financial connotation given the other verbs there. If I could turn to some of the 19th century history that we were discussing as well, because I think
19 green, 11 red
there may
on
be
the
a little
Dow,
bit more
so
to add there.
NASDAQ 65 green,
the 19th century cases about the president's inherent Article 2 authority to with respect
342
to in a wartime
with
respect to importation is not the power to impose tariffs.
Again, right now you see how we're not moving, but the high ticker's gassing. All of the equal weights are moving.
They were about the president's power, in a wartime as an occupying military force to impose tariffs in occupied territory, that in Mexico, in the Philippines, in California. The Civil War case might be the closest case, but even there, what we were talking about were essentially, there were licensing fees, but they were export fees. They were fees that were being imposed on the exportation of cotton from the occupied South into the North. And so I don't think any of that provides authority for this general notion that there is a background principle that the president, even in wartime, has an Article 2 authority to impose tariffs, certainly without the consent
biggest
of
problem
Congress.
would be if you had to return the revenue. I don't think they're going to settle on that.
You agree, I assume, given all the verbs in this list, that the president could do something like just shut down all trade between us and, say, China, right?
Yes, I mean, there are other limitations in the statute.
Okay, so doesn't it seem, and I think this is one of the points that Algonquin makes, and I think it's a point that Justice Kavanaugh was making, doesn't it seem then, I mean, I don't want to use the phrase lesser power, lesser included measure, but doesn't it seem like it would make sense then that Congress would want the president to use something that was less, weaker medicine than completely shutting down trade as leverage to try to get a foreign nation to do something?
And the president can in the form of, for example, quotas. But what makes an embargo or quotas fundamentally different from tariffs, as my friend has already explained, is the revenue-raising aspect of that. That makes it a far more significant power. It creates additional danger of overuse. And I think the other point, as Justice Jackson was pointing out, is that it cedes control over whether the transaction occurs from the government.
Remember, you saw this the other day,
to the individuals engaging in this transaction. And that is not what IEPA is intended.
What makes something revenue-raising? I mean, fees raise money, and unless they're going to be kind of one-to-one, this is exactly what it costs. I mean, it might raise some surplus. It might raise some extra. So is it the purpose? If the purpose of the fee or the tariff is to raise money, is it the purpose that makes it revenue-raising, or is it just the fact of surplus created that goes to the Treasury? Like, how do we decide this?
Yes, I think it's the effect. And to be clear, I think there would be a serious difficulty with interpreting any of these words, even to allow revenue-neutral exactions here, because none of them, and again, as far as I'm aware, IEPA has never been used in that way. But I don't think
even a processing fee?
I am not aware of any use of that sort of under IEPA. But even if that is permissible, I think that's permissible precisely because it doesn't have the effect of raising revenue.
Mr. Katyal,
well, they don't care about the
referred to
revenue.
common
I mean,
sense
after hearing this,
several times.
They're really
and I want
worried
to pick
about
up on
the,
Justice
the
Barrett's question, because
and
your
giving
interpretation of the statute, as she pointed out,
what this could
would
open
allow
up the door to,
the
and pretty
president
much
to shut
they want
down
it to be
all trade
revolving around Congress
with every other country in the world,
giving the
or
president
to impose
this
some
direct power.
significant quota on imports
the revenue is just the
from
side,
every
the
other
revenue
country
is
in
just
the
a
world,
reaction,
but would not allow
that's not really
a
what they're
1% tariff.
They're more worried about the
and
balance of
that
power
leaves,
and overreaching
in the
power.
government's words in its brief, an odd donut hole in the statute. Why would
they're either pushing
a
him to go
rational
harder,
Congress say,
or
yeah, we're going to give the president the power to
Congress
shut down trade? I mean, think about the effects. But you're admitting that power's in there.
Remember in the beginning,
but
remember
can't
they said, they're like,
do
dude,
a
why you could
1%
do embargoes.
Tariff.
You could block every import that the president can
seem,
do.
but I want to get your answer.
See what I'm saying? But kind of raising
have a lot of common sense behind it.
I think it absolutely does, because it's a fundamentally different power. It's not a donut hole. It's a different kind of pastry.
And on that power, that's a good one. On that power, though, and you've said this many times, and Mr. Katyal too, and look, I get this, obviously, but the court has repeatedly said a tariff on foreign imports is an exercise of the commerce power, not of the taxation power. And I'm repeating some, but John Marshall said that, and Joseph Story, and Chief Justice Hughes in the 1933 case, and we've said that quite a bit of time, which seems to at least undermine a bit your point that it's an entirely different power, because if it is foreign commerce power, it's the same power that Justice Barrett was talking about, of just embargoing trade with the entire world.
But everybody else is going, even
in
financials now, and they were a little weak.
There are a couple of points in there, and I'll try to get to all of them, but I mean, I think all of us agree that context is what matters here, and that you certainly could use the word regulate to talk about a tariffing power, like you could use it to talk about a taxing power. I mean, we impose taxes for regulatory purposes as well. But the federal government hasn't identified a single other federal statute that uses the term regulate to authorize tariffs or taxes. That is just a different kind of power.
And I thought your point in response to Justice Kavanaugh, it's a different kind of power because the power that's being authorized by this statute is the power to control or freeze trade. That's what Congress was getting at. And so if that's true, then we have to read regulate in that context.
That's exactly right. And I think the reason, getting back to common sense as to why a legislature might authorize that, is that you might not fear abuse of that power in the same way that you would be concerned about abuse of a power to impose unlimited taxes with sort of no controlling principles.
Well, why is that? Because, I mean, there is a sort of commonsensical intuition that one is, in Justice Kavanaugh's example, that one is greater and one is lesser. So why is that not right? Because, to be blunt about it, there's nothing, one of them there's something in it for the government and one of them there isn't. Actions that bring in revenue from the pockets of taxpayers to the Treasury pose a different set of concerns. Our framers were very concerned about that. A different set of concerns, how, why? Because they bring in revenue, and because that creates
Well, that seems a little tautological. Like, why is it that the revenue raisers are in a different category?
Because if there is some sort of international emergency and the appropriate way to deal with it is to make sure that no more than 1,000 of this product comes into this country at a particular time, this statute gives the president the power to ensure that exactly no more than 1,000 come in at this time. Setting a tariff doesn't ensure that only 1,000 will come into this country. It cedes control over whether the transaction occurs. And what it does is it then adds revenue to the Treasury, and that is again something that our framers thought was extremely important and a core Article 1.
But Algonquin, I mean, this kind of goes back to Justice Kavanaugh's point. Algonquin rejects the idea that it was impermissible to use the fees, and we can call them, license fees that functioned as tariffs or duties in that case, whatever. But Algonquin said that Congress could use the exaction of money to control quantity. And I hear what you're saying is like, well, you can control quantity by numbers by imposing hard limits, but not by money. But that's not what Algonquin said. So I guess, why?
Well, and I don't mean to suggest that you can't use exactions to control quantity. What I think Algonquin just shows the importance of context. It might be perfectly natural to read a phrase like adjust imports in the context of a statute that talks about tariffs, in the context of the Trade Expansion Act that has all sorts of provisions about tariffs and about the president adjusting tariff rates. It might be perfectly natural in that context to read a phrase like adjust the imports to be referring to changing tariff rates. It's just as unnatural to read a phrase like regulate importation to discuss that when the statute has nothing to do with tariffs and doesn't otherwise mention tariffs at all.
And do you think imposing tariffs is do you think that just blocking all trade is a bigger deal than imposing a 1% tariff across the board?
I think it would be a huge deal. It is just a different kind of deal.
Algonquin was not a constitutional case, right?
Correct.
It was a statutory interpretation case.
Correct.
And so the question there was simply, was Congress actually trying to give, or did Congress in that statute give the president the authority to impose these kinds of exactions? And the court looked at the text, and it looked at the legislative history in which there was a number of clues that Congress had actually intended to do that.
Yes,
right?
yes, and it looked not just at the text of those specific words, but also the context of what else was in the statute and the fact that some of the factors that the president was supposed to be considering.
Keep going.
And it would make perfect sense, I think, in a time of emergency for many of the reasons that General Sauer pointed out, that Congress would want the president to have the kind of authority that is imposed when you are embargoing things, when you are stopping the trade, when you are saying, for emergency reasons, we're not letting any of this product come in. I mean, sure, that's a big deal, but the nature of it makes sense in terms of an emergency. I think what you're saying is that the idea that the government would use its authority to be raising revenues in this situation is a different kind of power.
Exactly. This is a statute about giving the president control over assets, over transactions, over access to banking.
And tariffs don't do that. You said something about
exactly
tariffs tariffs in fact cede control over those sorts of things. So they sort of undermine the goals and the purposes of this kind of statute. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
From what you've said, go ahead. From what you said, it seems, and you said this, that the reason for drawing a distinction between tariffs and an embargo is the suspicion that tariffs will be used to raise money and therefore to circumvent Congress's power to control taxes. So it's a question of the risk that's involved. Am I right?
Yes.
That's what it boils down to.
Yes, well, and it's a question of understanding what Congress would have thought, what powers Congress would have thought it was conferring.
No, you actually
would Congress
remember,
have understood
you're at like higher than
the
yesterday?
phrase regulated?
Well, I mean, the question is why would Congress say you can impose a quota, you can impose a ban?
But then this is equaling. That's the good part about this. You guys remember,
your answer,
the market breadth has been terrible.
Because when
so you have a couple of big names holding up. Now you even got Amazon going.
About what's going on.
That's very nice.
We're suspicious about what's going
on.
So now
Equally is doing better than the normal spot.
Executive is trying to do is to raise revenue, and that's our business. Right? That's what it has to be.
Yes, and we know that every other time that Congress has authorized the president.
That's it. You're getting into a different argument. Then would you say the same thing if the measure is really about an emergency, an undisputed emergency and a really dire emergency?
Yes.
Would you have the same suspicion?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And again, I'll refer back to Justice Jackson's concurrence in Youngstown that emergency powers tend to breed emergencies. Look, Biden versus Nebraska, I think, says very clearly.
I really don't think you're answering the question. The question is, would you have the same suspicion when it is perfectly apparent from context that what the president is trying to do is to achieve a goal other than the raising of money?
I think what I'm trying to say is that you have to read the statute the way that Congress would have understood it when it was enacted, not how it is used in any particular case. It may be used for very good reasons in a particular case, but the question is, would Congress have understood itself to be ceding this power with no limits, unlike every other tariffing statute with no limits?
All right, I know that point. Let me ask you an unrelated question. Mr. Katyal listed some of the things that presidents have done under IEEPA, such as screening imports. Do any of the other verbs in IEEPA talk about could screening of imports be done under any of the other verbs in IEEPA?
I think maybe, but it would have been...
Which one?
Prevent. And so I think the question would be...
Screening is preventing?
Well, I think it depends what you're screening for, but if you were...
okay, how about imposing domestic requirements that are needed to safeguard domestic safety? Any other provision besides regulate? Any other verb besides regulate that would...
Well, again, I think if we're talking about potentially blocking some property from coming into this country because of safety concern, it might be that prevent would have gotten you there. What I think regulate does is it clarifies and amplifies that you don't just, it can be nuanced in that way. It can say, we will let this come in if it has certain safety requirements, if certain features have been disabled, something like that. And I think regulate harmonizes with prevent, investigate during the pendency, block during the pendency of an investigation, those sorts of verbs.
On the context point, the context of this statute, what Congress would have understood, it's an emergency statute. And presumably Congress wants to give the president tools to respond to the emergency in an appropriate way. And it seems odd to imagine a meeting in the Oval Office where the president's told, well, we have a problem with, I won't name a country, but country X, and you can stop all trade with that country. I mean, I'm not sure that's a, wise policy to give that much, but it's there, right? You agree it's in this 2%. Statute. But
they were down off of the investigation.
And the president says, well, that's too extreme. I want to calibrate my response to deal with this, and maybe a tariff of some kind. Like, oh, you can't do that. So you're forcing the president to respond to an emergency. And, Justice Alito's raised the point about, a real emergency. And you're taking away the president's suite of tools when the one is much more extreme that is authorized. That just seems a bit unusual. Think about India right now.
Yeah, that's the thing I was just saying there. Because if you were listening, that's what they're advocating. They're trying to tell them to do something more aggressive. They're saying you can block imports, you can block all this other shit, but you just can't do the tariff thing without Congress.
If that's gone, that's a tool that's designed, talk about foreign facing, the most serious crisis in the world. And that's out the window. So I just think it's just contextually emergency. It's just a bit unusual to read it that way. But I take your response. Taxation's different, and you got to stick with that line.
No, and I don't think it's just that. Because I do think it's that, but it's also that there are a range of tools that are more calibrated that the president can do. It doesn't have to be a complete embargo. It could be limits on particular kinds of products. It could be quantity.
I get it, but in the history of trade efforts to respond and push back, you're taking one away.
And the president, and there are many other statutes that might apply depending on the exact circumstances, 201, 301, 230.
Counsel, I think what we're forgetting here is a very fundamental point, which is the Constitution is structured so that if I'm going to be asked to pay for something as a citizen, that it's through a bill that is generated through Congress and the president has the power to veto it or not, but I'm not going to be taxed unless both houses, the executive and the legislature, have made that choice, correct?
That's exactly right.
So there is something, it's not just the taxing power, qua taxing power. The question is, do we permit the president to use the taxing power to affect his personal choices of what is good policy for me to pay for?
That's exactly right. The question is who decides.
Who decides and under what circumstances? Now, with respect to this, I mean, I'm not even going to the pretext argument, okay?
So think about those Ubers yesterday, kind of how it played out, but you have a couple of the other names going up.
On Canada for an added
red, but some of the bad earnings
on tariffs during the World Series. He imposed a 40% tax on Brazil because its Supreme Court permitted the prosecution of one of its former presidents for criminal activity. The point is, those may be good policies, but does a statute that gives, without limit, the power to a president to impose this kind of tax, does it require more than the word regulate?
Exactly.
That's your point.
Yes.
Thank you, counsel. Did Mr. Katyal say anything this morning with which you disagree?
No, I think we cleared up any maybe potential disagreement about licensing fees, but I think we all agree on that.
Okay. Justice Thomas? Anything further? Justice King?
Briefly.
Justice Gorsuch?
Thank you, Chief. So I just want to follow up on Justice Sotomayor's question at the end of a long afternoon. It does seem to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, that a really key part of the context here, if not the dispositive one for you, is the constitutional assignment of the taxing power to Congress. The power to reach into the pockets of the American people is just different, and it's been different since the founding and the Navigation Acts that were part of the spark of the American Revolution, where Parliament asserted the power to tax to regulate commerce. Some of those were revenue raising, some of them didn't raise a lot of revenue. We had a lot of pirates in America at the time. And Americans thought even Parliament couldn't do that, that had to be done locally through our elected representatives. Isn't that really the major questions, non-delegation, whatever you want to describe it, isn't that what's really animating your argument today?
I think it's a huge piece of what's animating our argument. Thank you.
Ms. Kavanaugh? Mrs. Jackson?
Can I just invite you briefly to address your kind of second-tier arguments, assuming that the president can impose these sorts of tariffs? Why do you think, for example, that the trafficking tariff here does not deal with the drug trafficking emergency for the purpose of this analysis?
So it doesn't deal with it because it's not a sanction imposed against traffickers. It is, if you think of it as a sanction, it is a sanction imposed against people importing lawful goods in the hope.
Doesn't that that happens all the time, right? I mean, all the other authorities indirectly provide leverage on countries in this way.
I don't think so. I think that they are, the history of IEPA and even of TWIA is imposing sanctions directly on the wrongdoers. These are statutes about providing sanction authority against international actors whose behavior we want to change, and that's not what tariffs do.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Rebuttal, General Sauer?
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. Just 3 points. One, an interpretive point. The statutory language here is regulate importation, and again, by means of instruments, licenses, or otherwise. Their argument is that that phrase carries with it a whole host of unenumerated forms of regulation, including quotas, licenses apparently that come with fees as long as they're sort of profit neutral fees, environmental restrictions, qualitative restrictions, reports, and so forth. It's just that the one form of regulation that they would not include is tariff regulation, which of course is the quintessential, most historically tested method of regulating imports. And so that additional phrase about, by means of instruments, licenses, or otherwise, really sort of reinforces the plain meaning, the ordinary, natural meaning of regulated importation here. So when it comes to just the plain text of the statute, their argument is a donut-type argument, and it's not an argument that does justice to the statute's plain text. On the non-delegation point, Justice Gorsuch, you alluded to the founding or delegations of the Indian commerce power, and I just remind the court that in 1790, in July of 1790, Congress passed a statute that essentially delegated to President Washington essentially the entire scope of the Indian commerce power. He said you can do commerce with Indians if you have a license that you had to pay a fee for. And that will be subject to such rules and regulations as the president makes with no further guidance. So when it comes to this foreign-facing there, it's obviously analogous because it's the Indian tribes, not foreign sovereigns, but this foreign-facing situation, we have a very sort of deep and profound historical pedigree through broad delegations of the regulation of commerce, right? The foreign commerce power, in that case, the Indian commerce power. And that ties, I think, to what I take to be the main theme of the arguments on the other side. And I think that Mr. Catchall started by saying tariffs are taxes. And I want to complete the answer I think I was giving to the Chief Justice when I got interrupted is, if you look at these tariffs, these policies, it is clear that these policies are most effective if nobody ever pays the tariff. If it never raises a dime of revenue, these are the most effective use of this particular policy. And I said there's two buckets there. One is, first of all, when it comes to the trade deficit emergency, if no one ever pays the tariff, but instead they direct their consumption domestically and spur the creation of the rebuilding of our hollowed out manufacturing base, that directly addresses the crisis. It's more effective if no one ever pays the tariff. That's the point of it, really. That's a fundamental point of it. And that's one piece of these. And then as to both of them, as to both of the declared emergencies, the tariffs are an incentive, a pressure point, leverage, bargaining chip, as the court said in Dames and Moore, to get countries to change their behavior to address the foreign arising emergencies. So if you look, for example, to take a historical example, last week's trade deal with China, it unlocked access to rare earth minerals, which of course have a critical national security aspect to them, and it got China for the very first time to change its policy with respect to fentanyl precursors, which is a crucial piece of that. Those tariffs, if no one ever collects them, but the threat of imposing those tariffs gets China and our other trading partners across the world to change their behaviors in a way that addresses this, then that's the most effective use of the policy. So they're clearly regulatory tariffs, not taxes. They are not, they're not an exercise of the power to tax. They are the exercise of the power to regulate foreign commerce. And that's why the statute says regulate. It doesn't say tax, it says regulate. And for that reason, we are squarely within the tradition that I was talking about before of very broad, historically very broad delegations of the power to regulate foreign commerce to the president because he has inherent Article II authority in the area of foreign affairs, although not that. It has to be delegated to him, otherwise the delegation would be superfluous. And for all those reasons, we ask the court to reverse both the decisions below.
Thank you, counsel. The case is submitted.
Yeah, I think that's it. I will see if they say any. That took a long time, but I enjoyed it. I was very, like I said, I have a little bit more faith in the Supreme Court. It sucks some of these, regional judges you've never heard of, everybody on the Supreme Court, and I hope you guys saw it, because some of you guys were getting a little offended in the beginning because you're like, I can't stand these judges, and they were challenging him. But I don't know if you noticed when the other lawyer was on there, the guy who was trying to argue to get rid of the tariffs, the judges, they pressed him too, man. That's how court cases work. It's funny, we were just talking about that even in Philo. You guys, I was just explaining that to you guys, so I hope you see how it works. But at the end of the day, I hope you are getting what they are debating. One big thing has to relate to, is it a tax or not? So I think that's incorrect. I think this idea of viewing a tariff as a tax, that's why every time you go down that rabbit hole of and they kept asking questions around it, if you view it as a tax, then yeah, they're like, no, you need congressional approval and all this. But I mean, I think that's a misnomer. I think that's a rebrand of tariffs. I don't think tariffs are a tax on the people. Can you argue that it is? Yes, but is that what it is? No, because that's what he kept saying. He's like, well, what do you mean? If they follow and people do this, the best case scenario is if people actually responded, nobody would get taxed. That's not how a tax works. A tax would say that you're getting taxed no matter what. It doesn't matter. You make money, you generate any money, whatever, you owe us this. But theoretically, if China was like, oh, we don't want a tariff, then we'll do in America, no one's paying anything. That's what they're arguing. But then also the other part, they're arguing not only is it a tax, they're also arguing that if you give the president this power, what's going to stop somebody else from doing a taxation, essentially. Even though you may argue the borderline nature of a tariff being a tax, if that goes through, then you're one step away from a president pretty much instituting whatever tax that he wants. And they're arguing about the power and whether or not he really even has that authority. So I thought it was fascinating. I love it. It was good to hear. I have a little bit more faith in the judicial system. I don't know about these regional judges, but other than that, pretty cool. And then there's a couple things at play. It's your best day in a while. I reminded you guys a few times here. Essentially, people are pricing in the end of the shutdown. We've heard talks on that. People are getting ready. Trump is actually going to be on in like 13 minutes. Let me see. And then, yeah, even though the earnings were good, it wasn't necessarily the best reactions. But Brett Baier hosts American Business Forum. We got Tony Robbins?
How many have children? Let me see a show of hands out there.
Damn, you got Tony Robbins
How many
and
of you have a relationship with a human.
And your boy. This is where Donald Trump's going to be.
This will work for you, okay? Here's what I want you to do. You have to be an influencer if you're going to be a leader. Okay. What makes you lead is your ability to influence thoughts, feelings, and emotions.
I don't know if I think they're going to copyright me if I play it.
Who do you got to influence?
Tony Robbins expensive, dog. You know what I'm saying? Tony Robbins expensive, but they say he's going to deliver remarks at 1 p.m. So I want to go and do I want to do the philo, but if he's going to start here, I mean, we might have to wait a little. So yeah, there's going to be this one. This is the Tony Robbins one. He's saying, hello, how are you? That's not what he said, but he said, you get a long term? Who has a long term? I do. I have many. See, why don't you have a fucking long term? You don't have a long term? I have a long term. You could get a long term. You don't get a long term. Get 2 long terms. I have 5 long terms. 1 long term, 5 long terms is all long term. You have long term, you get 2 long term too. That's what it's roughly on point. I don't know why I gave him that accent. So not bad, Chattadunia. Even my long term got a long term. So it's good, man. The premiums are still kind of sketchy today. But you got hitters. You got the Nike, you got the Qualcomm. I do like the China ones. I've been saying that. And then depending on what happens, you're going to get a little bit more. Yeah, it's in Miami. You guys are going to have so much traffic. That's what somebody in the chat said. And I feel, man. Because like Miami, when you guys have events, you guys get terrible traffic. It's such a shame. So good luck, man. Good luck. Good luck, Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago. It's a beautiful place. You should come. Do you golf? Oh, where's the biotechs and Pfizer? Other than that, Chad, I hope you're having it was a good day. Again, best day in a while. Some semblance of the market not dying. I'm glad we talked about what we did last night. Y'all weren't ready for any pump fake. And then again, we got to see, that was the other update. The funding rates dropped. So that pressure in terms of like funding, that's no longer on the table. Man, not bad. Not bad at all. Oh, where's that other one? Yeah, and then you have all these like tariff and then the government shutdown plays. Anything from like airlines to like SNAP benefit plays, those are going up too. Because again, we got rid of those elections and now people are going to be more motivated to end the shutdown. Because now holding people hostage does not have the same incentive that it did 24 hours ago. Have you ever thought about that? No. Oh. No, it's not at Mar-a-Lago. No. I was just making a joke. Qualcomm. All right, that one's good though, man. Let me double check the premiums. But then Amazon started to wake up. We even had to move on the other one. But yeah, even then the Qualcomms are kind of lagging. All of them though, in general. Even the Meta was looking good, but then it didn't go crazy. All the airlines, the airline index is up 5%. So that's all probably on this shutdown news. Let's see though. I want to do the philo, but like, how long is homeboy gonna lag? Because you know he's gonna lag, right? But it says notable speaker includes President Trump at 1 p.m. Wayfair. That was another one too. These furniture place. So not bad. How heavily do you consider open interest and volume on an option? I thought you listened all the time, bro. You're 0 for 2 with me today, dog. Chad, can you answer it for him? Maybe somebody else who listened will know. Yeah, they got Tony Robbins opening for Trump. That's pretty hard. That probably cost like $2 million. Like I said, Tony's not cheap, bro. Tony's not cheap. We got to do the Thanksgiving dinners. The pump feels over. It felt over right here. So that's why, do not be deceived. This is just the equal weight, kind of catching up. So we'll see what happens with all of it. But now, at the very least, I think Trump has one in the chamber. But I thought he was going to use it when the market was down. So in a weird way, let me put it this way: I would not get too hyped on Donald Trump right now. I don't think it's going to. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think he might say some stuff. It's about the economy. They have business leaders, but I don't think it's going to be I think it might be a little can kick. I think he's going to use the good news for when the market's actually a little bit more bumpy. Could be too much anticipation, but then that's how we've done everything, right? I think that's what I was saying last week, or about a week and a half ago now. Because, it wasn't bad, but everyone's like, oh, my gosh, this is going to happen. We have an event. We had all these things, but then by the time they came out, it just was normal. It's like, even this tariff stuff, like I'm telling you, we're listening, we're watching, people are reacting to it. So, it's changed. Oh, my God. But it's like, remember, you already even know the next step. We've talked about this a lot. It just took us a long time to get here. So, new information, stuff that's material and new, that'll move some shit. That'll get you active. That'll change some things. But if it's all just hype and anticipation, and then we end up with the same information that we already had, I don't think that advances anything. GSAT. Do we still have those plays? Oh, yeah, GSAT, a little 50-cent pop. Those came back down. Yeah, I still have one of the free ones. Expected move for Netflix? I mean, you just have to price that in. There's no earnings, so remember, they already had earnings. And then AMD too, that one actually did very well. We could have taken one of those. I want to see those premiums. I like the Qualcomm a little bit better, but if you bought them at the bottom, but damn, these are expensive as fuck. Yeah, they doubled up if you got a good purchase on those. So if you bought the AMDs when we got the Qualcomms, you would have made more. Those did actually a lot better. Not unless you went too far out. Yes, I do think people are trying to influence perception around the court thing. That's why I'm telling the best I could do is educate you, but people don't give a fuck anymore. I found that one out yesterday. Because literally just understand what the next step is. That's why people are, everyone focuses on the front thing, but it's like, no, what does it lead to? Tell me about the consequence. Understand the consequences. So you know what's going to happen whether or not that tariff gets approved. There is already 2 reactions you should be aware of. And that's why I even said there's a fucking easy ass play that I think is built around it, because no matter what, there's somebody who's going to benefit And then even if it does go through, they're probably going to be lined up with better news, and it still keeps them in the space as a lagger comparatively. So, yeah, I would view it and understand the situation. Everything after that, I mean, it's on you, but I do think a lot of people, they, it's a headline, and we've treated it like that. Remember the first time the IEPA shit hit? It brought the market down. And then little by little, we got to hear more and more, and you've had your big officials already kind of discussed this, a.k.a. Mr. Scott Bessant. Yeah, Eco8's chilling out a little bit now with all of it. So welcome. Again, Trump's about to speak, so maybe that's why. Or if you hear anything on the government shutdown, I think that'll be good as well, too. That'll start getting some people pumped up, or it's at least pumped a couple of these plays. Yeah, we might, but I think let me set it up and we'll go to Philo. We might delay, but, it's about to be 1 o'clock. So I could start it up and then see where he's at. If he lags too long, then I'll just go. You know what I'm saying? Bow, down, 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 down. Everybody long term. Bow, 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 bow. The record date is November 10th for Netflix. Nice. Good info on that. But yeah, if you don't own it before, then it won't be the same. So, or that's just where some of the front run capital will stop. It sucks. It did good that one day, but then it literally everything, gravity pulled it back. The gravity of the market. I don't know, I want to say there was something related to the WB stuff. Maybe. I don't know if they would tank, though. Because they have good assets. I think it's just a shitty company. But then lately, a couple of purchases, the buyer would go up. But, yeah, usually it goes down. Laser. Tony still talking. Hey Tony, I like the things you do. Hey Tony, if I would long term too. You're the one and only long term, and you say 10%. Come on, let's make it. Long term flakes. It's more than just save. It's gains. Wow, we could do that, bro. We should make some long-term flakes. Now feel me. They're great. No, I don't want your opinion though. I want information. That's why. So you get a warning too, brother. Again, no influence. I want info. Like I've explained the case to you guys. I'm telling you both sides of it. If anyone's gonna influence, it'll be me. But I do think there's an easy play. So, and I've already shared it. So y'all gotta decide, but I wouldn't overthink it. And you still, no matter what the fuck happened today, there's like 4 other things you still got to keep in mind that got us here. So you already should know the consequences and keep those in mind, and then also the pathway that led up to this moment. MO kind of dumping. right, I think it's gonna take you there. It's 10:02. He's already, you know, I'm even trying to lag, but he hasn't done it. Humana had earnings, they got clapped. So what should I do with that info, brother? You know where this is leading, right? Bye, buddy. I hope you find your dad. But yeah, they beat and raised, believe it or not. So that would be the info. CCCX, Department of Energy speculation. Can you get me a source on that? Yeah, it's popping. Doesn't, wait a minute. No, be careful. That's the one that would happen during that one day. Remember with the quantum? And then we dipped out of it, but yeah, they're pumping that option. So be careful, but you might have something. Yeah, those are shitty. They're a lot cheaper though from that last week. They posted on LinkedIn? Oh, fuck yeah. I'm down. Fucking idiots. But yeah, here, I'll tell you the one. Last time they did this, though, was a scam. It's a SPAC thing. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're going to pump it. I don't like this shit at all. Remember last time during the crypto thing and we played, or the quantum, and we played it? But then right when we saw it on NVIDIA day and it got crushed, and then we were like, yeah, fuck out of that. So, My overlay hasn't changed since 2020. I know, man. It's all simple shit, dog. Simple, easy, consistent, long-term flakes, dog. That's all. I was thinking about it the other day, and that's why, man, I think it gets so simple. And then, like, because I think you guys share it with your friends, and then the problem is, like, yo, remix it with a couple of things, but then a couple of bad remixes just fuck it up. You know, imagine your long-term, and then, you know, copying what we have, and then, like, yeah, long-term, 10%, look. Buy fucking Rivian quantum computer. What the fuck? You know, you'll get lucky a couple times with it, but just make sure that you I would just stay with the muscle car. This is it, man. Just pure V8 power. You know, it still competes very well, especially when the tech breaks. NVO Lilly announcement tomorrow. Yeah, I was saying, I just saw that go up. Those didn't really move though. Those CCXs. But I'm saying there was comparing the prices, that was the best value. Trump announcement is scheduled for 11 a.m. tomorrow. Deal with Lilly and Novo is expected to decrease prices. Yeah, so that, again, we've heard this one like 2 or 3 times. Eli's the one that fucking ran off of this shit. Yeah. Not bad. Not bad at all. They're great. All right, bro, is he here?
Your heart beats 100,000 times a day.
They praying?
You never even think it. It pushes blood through 60,000 miles of blood vessels. If you put all your blood vessels together,
yeah, y'all ain't never done this. Tony will get you doing crazy shit,
twice.
Bro. He'll get you jumping up and down and shit. He gets people motivated, dog.
How do we know when a baby's alive in the mother's womb? As soon as we have a heartbeat.
Look at you talking shit about my meditation.
When that heart stops,
like they ain't doing that.
Life in this plane of existence
$50,000 a ticket.
So breathe deep in your heart and pour a little gratitude or.
Says he giving you a philo. Why don't y'all walk out? All right, man. I don't think he's gonna come out yet. So while they're doing their philo, I think it's time we move to our philo. So if you want to hear a mix of Trump and some Jesus talk, and if you think those two are the same people, I'm gonna pray for you. But so I'll see y'all there, and you have a good day. If not, but don't join something you don't want to do, because I only invite those who want to listen to philo. Otherwise, that's really odd. You probably will despise me for getting something that you know is not what you wanted. But those who like what it is, they're gonna love it, because that's what they wanted. Oh, amen. So I'll see you guys there. It's free. You guys don't have to pay anything, but just click on that link in the chat and it'll take you there. So have a good one. Peace.